One goddamn religion. Satanic. Allah's delusions of grandeur. 1. Can Qusayy scam? Qusayy purchased the custodianship of the Kaaba for a skin of wine and a lute. Tabarit 6:21. Desolate is the best word to describe the lifeless wilderness into which Muhammad was born. Although civilization made its debut north and south, east and west of Arabia, for 55 centuries it failed to take root in the scorched, wind-blown sands. In the east lay Mesopotamia, the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates. Its legendary cities invented the tool that connects us, reader to writer. Man's greatest invention is written language. Nearly 5,000 years ago, the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians used cuneiform to convey their achievements in science, math, astronomy, law, medicine, agriculture, architecture, the arts, and religion. To the west, Mitzrayim was the land of the Nile where men who claim to be gods are known for their massive tombs, mummies, and hieroglyphics. Then, of course, there is the envy of Allah, Yisrael, where Yahowah's love for Yehudim was conveyed in the first phonetic alphabet, Hebrew. To the north, around the Black Sea, were the Nephilim, whose political violence and stifling religiosity Yahowah had eliminated millennia ago to give humanity an extension on life. And to the south, the Sabaeans gave rise to Arab monotheism through their interpretation of Judaism. Yet, while these advances were occurring, Arabia remained isolated and stagnant, providing the culture necessary to propagate Islam. Relative ignorance in proximity to intellectual achievements leads to the impoverished coveting what others have learned and achieved, and it gives rise to cults and conspiracies to bridge the gap and explain away the deficiencies. While we stand upon the shoulders of the Babylonian, Assyrian, and Sumerian scholars, we are haunted by their faith. 3 politically minded doctrines grew out of the religious schemes nurtured there: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. For 1,000 years, the most powerful forces were not nations but religions. The guiding document of Judaism is the Babylonian Talmud, which is rife with ancient pagan fables. Christianity's symbols, festivals, and doctrines are rooted in the practices of these distant peoples. Christmas, Easter, Lent, the priesthood, confession, the veneration of the Virgin Mary, the Trinity, resurrection, steeples, and a paid clergy are examples of present rites borrowed from a pagan past. Islam was not immune. Allah was modeled after sin, the moon god of Ur. The Quranic paradise and hell were imported from the same realm. And, of course, the Quran and Hadith were initially written on the outskirts of Babylon. The cuneiform indentations in clay that confirmed these startling realities became hieroglyphics along the Nile and an alphabet on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. We know from the temple writings in Karnak that pagan gods like those of the Fertile Crescent flourished in Egypt. We saw them emerge again in Greece, then Rome. Yet in Yisrael, it was a different story. Yahowah appeared unlike any other. In a world of idols, he was three-spirit. In a world of many, he was one. In a world of distant deities symbolized by astronomical bodies, he was personal, approachable, knowable, and, yes, even lovable. His one and only name is Yahowah. His people are Yehudim, beloved of Yah. His most acclaimed prophet is Moses, one who draws out. His firstborn son, our Messiah and Savior, is Daud David. Working together, as is his style, his prophets documented their history, past, present, and future, as well as their tumultuous relationship. In so doing, the people of Petra and Yathrib played a central role in the most telling of all tales. This story begins with Yahowah creating the universe so that he could conceive Adam and celebrate a relationship with him in the Gan Eden Garden of Joy. But what began well, took a turn for the worse. An arrogant cherub spiritual guardian descended the wall protecting the garden and twisted Yahowah's instructions, just as he would do in the Christian New Testament and then again in the Quran, all so that he could replace God in the lives of men and women. This snake was so efficient at corrupting mankind, even as the first civilizations were emerging, humans equipped with an neshama conscience, now congregating in large gangs, became so oppressive and violent, so much like today's Muslims, that God rued having conceived us. He cleaned house with the flood, beginning anew with Noach's trustworthy guide and an ark which would lead us to the covenant. And speaking of that Berith family relationship, in 2000 BCE, Abram and Sarai, who would become Abraham and Sarah, emerged from Ur, having walked away from Babylon to enter the promised land with Yahowah. And so begins the story of God's people, Yisrael, individuals who engage and endure with God, and to a line of Nabi prophets spanning 1,500 years. For crossing along the roof of the Arabian Peninsula, the route taken by the first family carried them along the Euphrates to an outpost town called Haran. There, Abram's father died, but not his father's God. Sin, the moon god of Ur, reigned supreme, as he would millennia later in Islam. Called by a higher source than even the moon and its god, Abram, Sarai, and Lot left the safety of the mighty river and headed to the land of Canaan, the promised land at Yahowah's beckoning. In the greatest story ever told, Abram became Abraham, father of nations. He sired Ishmael at 86 by way of his wife's Egyptian maid, and in so doing gave birth to the antagonistic seed of Islam. A decade later, the centenarian witnessed the miracle birth of Yitzhak, laughter to Sarai, now Sarah, engaging and enduring. Isaac became the child of destiny, for through him would come all of the prophets and patriarchs: Jacob, Judah, Moses, Joshua, Samuel, David, Solomon, Isaiah, Hosea, Jeremiah, Zechariah, and finally Malachi. While their prophetic testimony chronicles a turbulent past, it reveals that we will survive the current time of Israel's troubles and celebrate Yahowah's glorious return with Daud on Yom Kippurim, the day of reconciliations, in 2033. God's story was destined to play out at the crossroads of history, in the most contested land on earth, at the very intersection of continents. These great dramas depicting the rise of civilizations and faiths simply teased the Arabians. The footprints of culture, science, language, religion, law, and the arts were blown away by the scorching winds and shifting sands. The Chaldeans, Sumerians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Phoenicians, Hittites, Persians, Moabites, Edomites, Arameans, Greeks, and Romans, even the Nabateans and Sabaeans, all intertwined their histories with Abraham's descendants through Yitzhak, Isaac and Jacob, but not Ishmael. It was as if the Arabs were on a deserted five-island, marooned in time. Such was the milieu for Islam, a religion so sterile it could only have taken root in a like mind and place. The Arabs remained illiterate throughout the millennia, which is why we know so little about them. And it is why they knew so little about the world that engulfed them. Their language was derived from Aramaic, the dominant tongue of history's initial millennia. But Arabic found neither stylus nor pen for 100 generations. By Muhammad's time, less than 1 in 1,000 Arabian Bedouins could write. And classical Arabic, the language in which the Quran would come to be written, was just beginning to evolve by way of Hebrew, Aramaic, Nabatean, and Syriac. The Bedouins of the Syrian steppe were nomadic by necessity. Their land was too poor to support towns of substance. Arabs, a Hebrew name with a wide range of meanings, most of which are negative, were tribal peoples. There was never a dominant civilization over them. Most attempts to invade their peninsula were foiled by the harsh environmental conditions, further exacerbating the challenge of knowing their culture. For 3,000 years they were neither conquered nor conquerors, for subduing Bedouins was like herding cats. The Babylonians, Assyrians, Egyptians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans all failed. But it was not because Arabs were savage. They coveted freedom and valued nonviolence. For the first 3 millennia of recorded history, Arabs were among the world's most peaceful and self-reliant people. It is only during the last 1,400 years that they have been terrorists. The dividing line was Islam. Muhammad corrupted them. Islamic scholars try valiantly to paint the pre-Islamic period, called Jahiliyyah period of ignorance, in the worst possible light. They demonize 6th century Arabs to make 6th the resulting Islamic society, arguably the most ignorant and brutal in history, look good by comparison. But what little evidence we have of these people, particularly from the Nabateans and Sabaeans who thrived north and south of them, their lives and customs, indicate that they didn't act foolishly. Unlike their descendants in the 21st century, 7th century Arabs were a free, peace-loving people who cherished family values and honored tribal commitments. Reliant on springs, most Arabians provided sustenance by cultivating date palms, herding sheep, working leather, or running caravans. Their parched land was known for hardy camels and wide open spaces. With the rain clouds blocked by the ragged mountains of Syria, Israel, Jordan, and Western Arabia, more often than not the harbingers of life merely teased the land that became Muhammad's domain. It was these very conditions that made it impregnable. The roads that enabled the armies of Babylon, Assyria, Persia, Egypt, Greece, and Rome to conquer and control much of the world were difficult to build and impossible to maintain. And there was no incentive. Virtually nothing of value originated from this barren realm. It only served as a dry ocean to be crossed when carrying goods from producer to consumer. But since the Arabian Peninsula was surrounded by seas and the most vital of rivers, circumnavigating it was always easier than passing through it. The land Muhammad coveted was a foreboding wasteland, a place that time had forgotten. Whispers and faint echoes were all Arabs knew of the world surrounding them. Over time they came to hear of the gods of Nimrod and Babylon. Similar gods rose in Egypt, Greece, and Rome. They blended man, beast, and sky into palpable superstitions that elevated rulers to deities. The inventors and keepers of divine trust, God's 7 co-conspirators and messengers, crafted schemes designed to make their subjects submit, pay, and obey. By the 5th century CE, even in Central Arabia, most had heard of the monotheistic religions of Judaism and Christianity. An understanding of Judaism had come by way of the residents of Yathrib who had made it their home following their Babylonian captivity in the 6th century BCE. Its influence in the region was reinforced by Tuba Kariba and the Sabaeans after 430 CE due to a large number of Arab converts to Judaism in what is now Yemen. Stories of the Jews, their patriarch, Abraham, and his God, would have been commonplace. Moses was known as the Great Liberator, David and Solomon as kings. Following their captivity in Babylon, many Jews settled in Arabia, especially in the oasis town of Yathrib. They told the Bedouins that they were kindred spirits of sorts. The Torah claimed both peoples, Arabs and Jews, were descendants of Abraham. The Arabs traced their lineage through Ishmael, which is embarrassing because he was the bastard son of a slave girl. The real heir to Yahowah's covenant was Yitzhak, born to Abraham's wife Sarah. Innocent enough, such notice would loom large. It was in the crumbling ruins of Petra that the initial sparks of Islam were kindled. The city, known as Rakamel rose stone to the Nabatean Arabs who made it their capital, was 70 miles due south of Jerusalem. This oasis in the desert between the Dead and Red Seas in what is known as Wadi Musa, began as a protected watering hole for camels and caravans carrying goods along the short land bridge for ships sailing from India with cargo bound for the Mediterranean. The city reached its zenith under its Nabatean founders between 50 BCE and 50 CE, supporting a population of 20,000 inhabitants as a result of an extensive aqueduct system. The kingdom and city fell to the Romans in 106 CE, but it continued to flourish as a trading center due to its infrastructure and location between the Mediterranean and Red Seas. But that all came crashing down during a devastating earthquake in 363 CE. It leveled all of the grand temples and destroyed the aqueduct. Abandoned thereafter by the Nabateans and Romans, it became a Mecca for Christians, who converted many of the surviving buildings into churches. Jews, seeking to survive the Romans, also filled the vacuum they had left behind. This is how Muhammad would have known it, a relic of its former commercial and religious glory. There would have been an unpretentious and uncontentious mix of Christians, Arabs, and Jews, with pagans living among monotheists, all pining over a more glorious past while surviving a humble existence. Life would become so difficult in the land of the Qusayy that within 60 years of Muhammad's siege of his hometown in January of 630, and the defeat of Husayn ibn Ali and the rivals Ubayd Caliphate by the Umayyad forces in 692, the city was abandoned and the Qusayy was moved to its present location in Mecca. From 700 CE to its rediscovery in 1812, the echoes of the past were silenced. Everything about Petra fits the Quranic and Hadith depictions, including all of the initial Qiblas, while nothing about Mecca matches. And so, while the Hadith speak of Mecca, they were all written a century after the Qusayy was relocated, and they all describe the conditions experienced in Petra. This is also how the fledgling faithful in Petra came to know something of Christianity, which by the 7th century was the most pervasive religion in the region. While Christian ideals were winning converts in the literate realms of Egypt, Rome, Greece, and Persia, throughout Judea and down into Petra, such was not the case in Arabia. There, Christians were being persecuted with a vengeance by an Arab convert to Judaism named Dhu Nuwas, who had risen to power in Yemen. This, too, would have 9 haunting echoes, for the Christian faith was reduced to a faint whisper compared to that of the Jews. Allegiance to tribe and family kept these people grounded. The nomads lived without police, laws, or judges, as there were too few to govern. Clashes between tribes occurred but were usually settled by one raiding the other's flock, a goat for a goat. It was often a game played for bragging rights. They despised treachery and deceit. In skirmishes, honor was more important than victory. The subjugation of another tribe was never contemplated. Early Arabs were neither passive nor aggressive. Surviving was battle enough. They practiced a crude form of Hammurabi's laws 2,500 years after they had been written. Murder was avenged by murder, theft by theft, insult by insult. To facilitate commerce, tribal alliances were formed by politically minded princes. More militant than the local tribal chiefs, they occasionally waged skirmishes in pursuit of plunder and power. Like Islam's prophet, their sphere of influence grew at the point of a sword. Sir John Glubb, a student of Islam and lifelong resident of Arabia, explains, these peculiarities are important to the career of Muhammad. He became a man of political and military authority, so the Bedouins saw him not so much as the messenger of Allah, but as a new prince. Entertained lavishly in his company, tribal chiefs were often enticed to align their clans with his movement. From what we can tell, Arabs were prone to superstition and addicted to poetry, factors that would loom large in the formation of Islam. Poetry conceived by Hanifs, Arabs who had converted to Judaism in Yemen, became the initial ingredient in Muhammad's religion. The Hanifs were monotheists, believing that they shared the legacy of Abraham. Early on, Muhammad aligned himself with them, calling his religion Hanifism. Later, in a struggle for power, he renamed his crusade submission and waged a war of words, then swords, against those who had inspired him. It is interesting that all of the positive values extolled by Muhammad's Lord Rahman in the first 40 Quranic surahs were a subset of Bedouin values and Hanif beliefs. They promoted the protection of the weak, charity, and good deeds. Sadly, much of this would be abrogated, as would the nature of Muhammad's God. He became Allah, vengeful, paranoid, deceitful, arrogant, and violent. Allah became indistinguishable and inseparable from Muhammad, likely because the devil's advocate was demon-possessed. That did not bode well, especially recognizing that the amalgamized religion was contagious and would spread around the world. 500 miles south of Petra lay Yathrib, the best-known and most easily accessed city in Arabia. It had been occupied by Jews for 1,000 years before Muhammad's arrival. It was a vibrant oasis in the midst of the Hijaz Mountains. The Quraysh history, as best we can piece it together from the Islamic scriptures, goes something like this. The Qusayy tribe from the south ousted the Jurhum clan around 400 CE. Tabari explains, the Jurhum acted badly, stealing sacrifices that had been presented to the Qusayy. They were oppressive. Ishaq agrees, the Jurhum were heavy-handed, guilty of taboos, and treated the Qusayy gifts as their own. A battle ensued and the Qusayy expelled the Jurhum from Mecca. The Jurhum's legacy was the 2 gazelles of the Qusayy and the cornerstone which they buried in the well of Zamzam. They retreated to Yemen bitterly grieved at losing control of the Qusayy. Why would losing control of a dilapidated rock shrine dedicated to rock gods grieve the dearly departed? The answer has far-reaching implications that 11 would ultimately topple a pair of towers on the other side of the world. The plot, as they say, is about to thicken. On their own merits, the Qusayy in the remnants of a decaying Petra, and the Hashim tribe of the Quraysh, would be among the least important places and people on earth, for the world is awash in illiterate pagans, mud huts, and rock shrines. But as a result of Qusayy's ingenuity and Muhammad's bravado, they would become the raison d'etre of Islam and freedom's most fierce adversaries. If the Islamic scripture is even partially accurate, Islam's first god, Rahman, and the Qusayy, predated Muhammad by 5 generations, emerging a century after the collapse of Petra during the Great Earthquake. He didn't invent them. Nor did he conceive the pagan rituals, fairs, holy months, fasts, prostrations, taxes, and pilgrimages that made these things worth owning. In the preceding chapters, we studied how the Talmud's interpretation of the Torah was corrupted to give the Qusayy a religious veneer. But why is considerably more important and more revealing? To appreciate Islam for what it really is, we must first come to understand Muhammad's motivation for deriving a modified monotheistic doctrine from an old assemblage of pagan idols and existing religions. We must come to know why Islam's prophet incorporated his people's crude rites into his concoction. In that his revelations were less than inspired, there must have been something that inspired him to promote a stone. Yes, Muhammad and his fellow Hashemites worshipped rocks. Lacking craftsmanship, artistry, and tools, they were unable to make the elegant statuary synonymous with other religious idols. The most interesting stones became gods. Most had personal names. The biggest rock, thereby the biggest god of the Qusayy, was Allah. His oval stone was a dark reddish brown. But Allah was a fractured deity. Over 12 time and abuse, he had been splintered into 7 chips, all banded together. Compared to the devotion his fragments enjoy, the pieces are rather small, combined they are only 11 by 15 inches. Today, the chips are embedded in the eastern corner of the Kaaba, 4 feet above the ground. Although, as was the case with the initial rock pile, Allah shares billing with another rock, this time Hajar as-Sa'ada, the stone of felicity, which is set into the opposite corner. However, Allah is no ordinary assemblage of minerals. He, like his predecessor, Rahman, had a pre-Islamic past. And, as we have seen, Muslims have a variety of entertaining accounts of how they were graced by such an auspicious token of the universe's creator. But before we entertain the justifications for promoting a pair of pagan stones, let's look at Allah and Rahman through the eyes of a historian. Stone cults were neither uncommon nor uncivilized. Even the Greeks were wont to worship stones. Apollo was once believed to be a meteorite in Delphi. His sanctuary was thought to be the center of the earth. Robert Charroux, in Masters of the World, explained, Hellenius, the son of Priam and a famous Greek soothsayer, could foretell the future by means of a stone that had been given to him by Apollo. To obtain the oracle of the gods, he shook the stone above his head and recited the incantations. The stone then spoke in a strange, faint voice and announced the future. A millennia later, Muhammad would heed the summons of another talking rock. But the black stone and its house were hardly unique. There were many such temples, called tawagits, scattered across Arabia. Patrons made sacrifices and left gifts to their stone of choice, prostrated themselves in prayer, and circumambulated the shrines. Most commanded Hajj and Umrah pilgrimages during holy months. Those seeking the rock's blessing 13 would commonly rub themselves against the stone and kiss it reverently. The Islamic Sunnah agrees. Ishaq 38 Every house had an idol which they worshipped. They would rub the stone for good luck. When Allah sent Muhammad with the message of monotheism, the Quraysh said, would he make many gods into one god? This is a strange thing. This line was repeated in the 38th surah, and unfortunately for Islam, many false gods do not one true God make. Ishaq 38 Now along with the Kaaba, the Arabs had adopted tawagits, temples they venerated like the Kaaba. They, too, had their custodians. They used to circumambulate them. According to the Islamic hadith, Allah was one of many pagan rock idols and the Kaaba was one of many pagan rock shrines. Islamic circumambulation was one of many pagan rites. In particular, the Quranic Trinity made famous by the Satanic verses were all worshipped in Petra's pagan past. They were Al-Lat, goddess of sexual prowess and reincarnation, Al-Uzza, goddess of power and control who was worshipped like Asherah, and Manawat, goddess of destiny and predestination associated with Nemesis. Also venerated in Petra was Dushra, a corruption of the Assyrian Asherah, as the lord of the mountain and calm, the war god who defended caravans. And while there were no monuments to him, the first written reference to Allah was carved into a stone near Petra. However, while these were the principal deities of the religious and commercial cities pre-Roman past, after the Edict of Milan in 313 CE decriminalizing Christianity and the earthquake of 363 CE, Petra's pagan population was replaced by Christians and Jews looking for a safe haven away from infighting over Jerusalem and Damascus. 14 As an interesting aside, since the earthquake's epicenter was south of Galilee, some 200 miles north of Petra, what was left of Jerusalem was devastated. And at the time, Christians actually celebrated the tragedy as a gift from their God because they had been indoctrinated by their scriptures to hate everything associated with Jews, Jerusalem, and Judea. Also revealing, on the southern shore of the Dead Sea, just 25 miles north of Petra, a group of 4 gravestones remind us that the region was monotheistic, not pagan. Among those carved in May 363 are that of Slitha and her daughter Kyra, a teenage girl named Ob and her father Samicon, who were killed in Zor. Ob's tombstone, written in Greek, reads, Monument of Ob of Samicon who died at 15 years during the earthquake in year 258 on 28th of month Artemisios, on day of moon, Monday. Be of good cheer, Ob, no one is immortal. One is the God. The remaining holdout on behalf of paganism in the region, Petra, witnessed the destruction of her temples, as they were all toppled and never rebuilt. Therefore, there was a time when this would have been accurate of Petra. Ishaq 38 Al-Lat was in a Tawagit temple in Faif which was venerated like the Kaaba. Ishaq 38 Luhay put Al-Uzza in a Nakhla Tawagit. When they had finished their Kaaba Hajj they circumambulated Al-Uzza. The Quraysh worshipped her. Manat was worshipped by the Aus and Khazraj in Yathrib. Those who prayed to Al-Uzza and Manat, Ishaq 39, shaved their heads and completed all of the rites associated with the Hajj. Since these men would have been pagans in the 3rd century CE, how did their rituals venerating Petra's goddesses become part of Islam in the 7th century and why? Moreover, someone in Kufa, Iraq was clearly confused. Al-15 Uzza and Manat were venerated in Petra and, thus, incorporated into Islam and the Quran, but not Yathrib since it was a Jewish enclave. Muslims are compelled to observe the same rituals today. The black stone, its house, the prostration, kissing, circumambulation, shaving, the Hajj, Umrah, and holy months migrated from Petra's pagan past to Islam. While none of this is accurate, that wasn't the point. Ishaq 39 Many Arabs served an idol named Dhul Khalasa. Himyar had a temple called Riyam. Ruda was the temple of the Banu Rabi'a. Dhul Kaibat belonged to the Banu Bakr. Bahira was the filly of the Sa'iba. Hami was their stallion. Wasila was a ewe. Muhammad said, Allah has not made Bahira, Wasila, or Hami. And those who do not agree invent lies. Those tasked with compiling Islam's Sunnah in Kufa, Iraq during the 8th and 9th centuries projected paganism and idol worship upon Arabians. It was required because, without it being prevalent, Muhammad's fictitious claim to having brought monotheism to the denizens of the desert ceases to be viable. And yet, by this time, monotheism was much more ingrained than paganism, particularly with now Christian Petra and Jewish enclaves of Yathrib and Sana'a representing the largest population centers in the desolate region. Nonetheless, the framers of revisionist Arabia claimed that the Nabateans bowed to Dhul al-Shara in his shrine in Petra. They said that he was a proud god with a large rectangular stone and an elegant temple to match. Evidently, like Allah, Dhul al-Shara was a reddish-brown rock. Fellow moon gods could allegedly be found in Merib, Huriyada, and Tama. Il-Umku was the Sabaean moon god in Merib. In Huriyada, the god was Sin. A leading deity in Haran, and elsewhere throughout Mesopotamia, his inception dates back to the Chaldeans in Ur. The last 16 Babylonian king, Nabonidus, built an elaborate Tawagat in Tama to his moon god while in exile. And that realization would make this pronouncement particularly incriminating. Bukhari v6b 60 and 374, we were in the Prophet's company in the middle of the lunar month. He looked at the moon and said, "You will see your Lord as you see this moon." The reverence to the moon was hardly a flight of fancy. In the 8th chapter of Shabat Judges we find an especially incriminating affirmation that by 12th century BCE the crescent moon was a prominent religious symbol among Arabs. The story pertains to the Midianites, an Arab kingdom centered around Mount Choreb where the Torah was revealed, stretching north and south to Petra and Yathrib. They were acting like Muslims, invading and terrorizing Israel as far north as Galilee. They destroyed Israel's crops and stole their livestock. The cited story regarding the crescent moon medallions on the necks of camels pertains to Gideon's battle against the marauding religious and political terrorists who had haunted his people. Following Yahowah's instructions, Gideon defeated the invading Arabs and pushed their hordes across the Jordan, capturing their ruthless kings, Zebah sacrificed and Zalmunna denied. After they confessed to murdering Gideon's brothers, and then taunted Gideon, claiming that he wasn't man enough to kill them in return, we read. Then, Zebah, Zebach, sacrifice, and, Zalmunna, Sel, shadow/shade and manna, withheld and denied, said, Amar, rise up and take a stand yourself, Ada, you should get up and stand up yourself, to strike us, Pega ba anaknu, to come upon us, for such is the measure of the man, ky kaha because this is what men are like, of strength 17 and valor, Gaborahu, showing his power and might, capability and courage as a man. So, Gideon, Gidon, pertaining to cutting and severing, stood, he arose and took a stand, and killed, Harag he put to death, Zebah, Zebach, sacrifice, and, Zalmunna, Sel, shadow/shade and manna, withheld and denied. Then he grasped hold of and took, Lakach, he seized, the crescent moon ornaments, Eth-ha-Saharanim, moon crescents, which, symbolic of the relationship, Asher, were on the necks, B8 Sayar, of their camels, Gamalhem. Shabat/Decide/Judges 8 verse 21. So today, when you look up and see crescent moons decorating Muslim mosques and flags, you'll know that the Arabian love affair with the moon, terrorism, plundering Israel, and braggadocio even unto death, has survived 30 centuries. A religion based upon resurrecting the past managed to find nothing but the worst. Even in his neighborhood, Allah had competition. The sun god Manaf was worshipped by the Quraysh, as was Hubal, a handsome idol carved into the shape of a man. Al-Uzza, Al-Lat, and Manat, as chips off the old block, were stones. Manat was symbolized by a darkened moon, eerily reminiscent of Islam today. She was the goddess of fate and predestination, which looms large in Islam. Being a good pagan, when Muhammad fulfilled his Umrah pilgrimage in Mecca, he shaved his head in Manat's presence as was the custom among those who worshipped her. This pagan practice was invested with godly overtones when Muhammad insisted that Abraham had done likewise. Later, Muhammad honored the pagan goddess Manat by incorporating the belief she espoused into Islam and by using her insignia as the logo of his new religion. Not to be outdone, Al-Lat had her own shrine in Petra and Taif. A cubic rock, she lived on barley porridge. While 18 her diet was humble, her veneration was not. Her temple lies under the left minaret of the early Islamic mosque of Taif and is prominent in the ruins of Petra. Al-Lat's sister, the goddess Al-Uzza, was considerably younger and lived in the neighboring Wadi Musa. A Quraysh favorite, she received the most lavish gifts and sacrifices. Muhammad saw her as a nude black woman. Interestingly enough, Islam was nearly sacrificed at the altar of these goddesses. When tipping his hand and showing that Islam had been nothing more to Muhammad than the pursuit of sexual exploits, power over others, and stolen wealth, the non-prophet said that the goddesses Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat were conduits to Allah, serving as high-flying intermediaries. But then when the monotheistic wing of his fledgling faith, notably his father-in-law, Abu Bakr, objected to 4 pagan gods being 3 too many, the demon-possessed charlatan confessed that he had been inspired by Satan, in the Quran as well as Hadith. Islam as a religion died that day in Petra, only to be reborn as a political doctrine in Yathrib the following year. But we're getting ahead of our story. Although Muhammad is errantly and posthumously credited with bringing monotheism to Arabs, the Quran venerates 3 distinctly different gods. In the first Petran period, the god was a nameless lord. And that is a serious blow to Allah's credibility because the Lord is Satan's title and the name applied to him when he is pretending to be a god. Consider these examples. 19-inch Then the children of Yisrael became religious, and thus evil, as they served the Baal and lords. Shabat/Judges 2 verse 11. And, Wah, he answered, Amar, it is not I who has troubled, lo, Akar, Heth, I am not the source of hardship or anguish who distresses and oppresses, excommunicating the people of Yisrael, but you, Ada, and your father's household, Wah Baith, of Ada, by, Ba, neglecting, rejecting, and abandoning, as of Ada, the instructive conditions pursuant to the relationship with Eth Mitzvah, Yahowah. You have followed after, Wah Halak Nachar, the lords, Ha-Baalim, the ones who control and possess in the name and title of Satan, the god of Babylon and Canaan. Melachim/1 Kings 18 verse 18. They turned to and presented themselves before, Panahem-La, facing toward, Ha-Baalim the lords, Ha-Baalim, those who seek to lord over, own, and control, offering sacrifices, Zabak, to false gods, Wala Ha-Pasal, to religious images and objects of worship, while blowing smoke and burning incense, Qatar. How-Shah/he protects/Hosea 11 verse 2. I will take an inventory and record, Wapekad, I will recount and keep a record, against her, Al-Hai, for the time in association with, Eth-Yaum, Ha-Baalim the lords, Ha-Baalim, those who seek to control, to be masters and lord over, to possess and seek to own, because, Asher, she blew smoke, burned incense, and made offerings to them, Qatar Lahem. Then she was adorned, playing religious dress-up, Ada, she wore clothing designed to show her status, with her ornamental rings and circular objects, Nizam high, with round sun discs on her ears, nose, and fingers. Bejeweled, Kelia, she went after, Halak Nachar, her lovers, pursuing her desires and illicit relationships, Ahab high. 20 And she ignored and then forgot me, Eni Shakach, prophetically announces, Yahowah, the proper pronunciation of YYV2C1, our Eloah, God as directed in his Towrah, teaching regarding his Hayah, existence and our Shalom WM, restoration. How-Shah/he saves/Hosea 2 verse 13. During, Ba, in, with, and on, this specific day, Ba Hayam Hahu, it shall be, Haya, it will happen and come to exist at this moment, Cal Perfect, prophetically declares, Naam, reveals in advance of it occurring, YYV2C1, our Eloah God as directed in his Towrah teaching regarding his Hayah existence and our Shalom WM restoration, you will invite, welcome, and meet with me as an individual, Kara, Eni, you shall move toward and greet with me as your marriage partner, summoning me as if I were a husband, as one who is present as a person in your midst. And then you will never again call me, Lo Kara La Eni, you will not summon me or recite aloud to me, Cal imperfect, literally never refer to me and forevermore never proclaim, Baali, my Lord, Baal Eni, ever again, Aud, now or forevermore. How-Shah 2:16. For I will remove, Wasur, renounce and reject, separating myself from, revolting against, repudiating and abolishing, accordingly, the names and reputations, Shem, the designations and renown, of Ha-Baalim the lords, Ha-Baalim, of the false god seeking to possess and control, from, Min, out of, her mouth, Pehai, her lips and language, and, Wa, they shall not be remembered, recalled, or mentioned, Lo, Zakar, they will not be proclaimed or be brought to mind, by, Ba, their name, Ba Shemhem, ever again, Aud, any longer, How-Shah/he saves/Hosea 2 verse 17. Incriminating himself, Allah brags that he is the Lord. Quran 37.122 Lo. They were among our believing slaves. 21 Quran 37.123 Lo. Verily, Elias was one of the sent. Quran 37.124 He said to his people, will you not fear? Quran 37.125 Will you cry to Baal Lord and forsake the best of creators? Quran 37.126 Allah, your Lord and the Rabbi of your fathers. Quran 37.127 But they denied him, and so, certainly, they will be brought up, for punishment and doom. Quran 37.128 Except the devoted slaves of Allah. Here, since the Lord is disassociating himself from the Lord while claiming to be the Lord, one of two things can be assumed. Either Allah doesn't know that Baal means Lord, and, therefore, has impugned himself by proving to be an idiot, which would be consistent with claiming to be one of many creators, or the Lord is toying with his slaves. Either way, while Allah is the Rabbi of Islam and the Master of Muslims, he assuredly is not God. Allah's, actually Allahu, Allahi, and Allah, early Quranic Lord designation, from the Hebrew word Rabbi my exalted, was modeled after Zayd's God. This is not surprising since Hanif's poems formed the basis of the initial surahs. The Hanifs derived the title Lord and their faith from the Jews, a people whose rabbis called their God Lord for fear of saying his name. If Yehudim Jews had used Yahowah's name as they had been instructed, Islam's Allah would not have fooled anyone when presenting himself as the author of the Torah. But since all gods had names, during the second half of the Petra period, Muhammad called his Lord, Ar-Rahman. Inscriptions from the 5th century reveal that Rahman was worshipped in Yemen by Arab converts to Judaism. This is because Judaism disallowed the mention of Yahowah's name, and replaced it with either Adoni 22 my Lord or Hashem the name, so these Arab converts used Rahman Merciful to address the God of the Torah. Affirming this, the exploits of Dhu Nuwas, the Jewish Yemeni king, were chronicled in Greek, Syriac, and Aramaic. When he attacked the Abyssinian Christians in southern Arabia in the early 6th century, he swore by Ar-Rahman, the Merciful, and Ar-Rahim, the Benevolent. An invocation including these gods' names now precedes all but the 9th surah. Muhammad transitioned from Lord to Rahman in surahs 56, 68, 78, 89, and the last half of surah 93. While none of these mention Allah, Rahman and Lord are used interchangeably, often side by side. The names Rahman and Rahim are used 51 times in the Petra period and twice in the first of the Yathrib surahs. Then they disappear, replaced by Allah, never to be mentioned again. Surrounded by a veritable sea of false gods, all Muhammad did was whittle down the number. An interesting insight in this regard can be found in Quran 21.036, when the unbelievers see you they make fun of you, mocking you, ridiculing you. They say, is this the one who mentions your gods? They would deny all mention of Ar-Rahman. While this proves my point and devastates Allah's credibility, it is but one shot to the heart of the Quran and there are many. The 21st surah, named after what Allah had to steal because he could not inspire, al-Anbiya prophets, speaks volumes. And it is well past time we listen to the most demented and demonic deity ever devised, not because he is God, but because he is not. Quran 21.001 draws near for mankind, while they turn away in heedlessness. Quran 21.002 never comes not to them a reminder from their Lord but they listen to it while they jest and play. 23 Quran 21.003 with hearts trifling with frivolity, those who do wrong conceal their private counsels, is this more than a human being like you? Will you succumb and submit to witchcraft and enchanting sorcery when you see it? Quran 21.004 He said, my Rabbi knows every word in the heavens and on earth. And he is all hearer, all knower. Quran 21.005 Nay, they say, these are mixed up, muddled, and false dreams. Nay, he has invented it. Nay, he is a poet. Let him then bring us a sign, some proof, like the ones that were sent before. Quran 21.006 Not one of the towns of those which we destroyed believed before them, will they then believe? Quran 21.007 And we sent not before you but men to whom we inspired, so ask the followers of the reminder if you do not know. For no other reason than he is completely impotent, Allah tries to scare Muslims into religious slavery by threatening to resurrect and torture all who do not believe him at some future day of doom. But since threatening a future event isn't sufficient to get everyone to succumb, Allah played his I also got him in the past card. And through it all, Allah continues to be rejected. It would not be until Islam was mandated by the sword when speaking against Allah or leaving him was met with decapitation, that Allah's imbecilic threat galvanized the faithful. The only informed and rational response to the gibberish we are reading is to mock it, which is what those who listened to Muhammad in Petra had done. They knew that the message was as muddled as it was demonic. Not only was there no sense of organization or morality, there were no prophecies. So the rabbi protests. Quran 21.008 And we did not create bodies that would be immune to hunger, nor that were immortal and exempt from death. 24 Quran 21.009 Then we fulfilled to them the promise, and we saved them and those whom we willed, but we destroyed the polytheists. Quran 21.010 Certainly, we have sent down for you a book in which there is decrocum reminder. Have you no sense? Quran 21.011 How many communities, civilizations, cities, or towns, that were disbelievers, have we destroyed, and replaced them with other folk? Quran 21.012 Then, when they felt our punishment they began to flee and fly. Quran 21.013 Flee and fly not, but return to your luxurious pleasures which emasculated you, and to your dwellings so that you can be interrogated. According to the Quran, the purpose of human bodies now and on the threatened day of doom is to increase the pain Allah can inflict. Like God, like jihadist, I suppose. There never was a warner or a reminder. Allah's memory seems to be failing. While the Quran is an amalgamation of 10 score of religious fables, and thus exudes some similarity, no wannabe God has ever been this demonic or delirious. While the answer to the question that Allah seems to have forgotten that he has asked 40 times previously is none, that simply makes it worse. To confess to, even brag about, and then try to capitalize upon, a deadly terrorist attack on civilians whose only crime was not surrendering, is psychotic and sadistic. But it's worse than just claiming to be the author of perpetual genocide because Allah not only is preventing his hostages from fleeing, he has the audacity to interrogate his victims. Then in a 7th century rendition of victim shaming. Quran 21.014 They cried, oh woe, alas for us, we were the disbelievers. 25 Quran 21.015 And that cry of theirs never ceased till we mowed them down and made them extinct, as ashes, silent and quenched. This is so obviously demented and demonic, shame on politicians and the media for coddling Islam and allowing those who believe this to infect and harm others. Allah is a sadist and this is psychotic. Quran 21.016 We created not the heavens and the earth and all that is between them for play out of fun. Quran 21.017 If we intended to take a pastime and make a plaything, we could have made it ourselves if we had cared to do so. Clearly, Allah has a hobby. It is called terror and torture. But make no mistake, Allah's vocation was not writing. He was at best, quasi-literate. Quran 21.018 Nay, we fling the truth against the falsehood, so it destroys it, and behold, it is vanished. And woe to you for that which you ascribe. Quran 21.019 To him belongs whosoever is in the heavens and on earth. And those who are near him are not too proud to worship him, nor are they weary. Quran 21.020 They glorify night and day, they flag not, are never languid, intermittent, or slack. Quran 21.021 Or have they taken gods from the earth who raise the dead? Had there been therein gods besides Allah who for him then verily both would have been disordered and ruined. Glorified be either to him, the Rabbi Lord of the throne, above what they attribute to him. Allah lives an unfulfilling existence without any meaningful relationships. All around him worship him, which serves to affirm that he is a narcissist. Quran 21.023 He cannot be questioned about what he does, but they will be questioned. 26 Then he cannot be God because Yahowah encourages and answers questions. It is how we learn. Moreover, there is no reason to question men. Upon Yahowah's return, the likes of Muhammad, Paul, and Aqaba will not be interrogated but, instead, accused and condemned. The evidence against them will be retrieved and presented, but there will be no excuses. God does not care why they misled or abused his people, only that they are held accountable for having done so. Quran 21.024 Or have they taken for worship gods besides him? Say, bring your proof. This is the reminder for those with me and the reminder for those before me. But most of them know not the truth, so they are averse. A god seeking to be worshipped by an inferior being, as is partially the case with Allah, is a narcissist who is to be avoided. I say partially because, while Muslims have become his slaves, a thinking individual with free will is vastly superior to the Islamic ungod. And unable to bring proof, evidence that this is a reminder, or an actual book, Allah has his non-profit pander for evidence elsewhere. And in the case of his audience, in that it would have been comprised of Christian Gentiles, Arab monotheists and pagans, and secular and religious Jews, they wouldn't have any. While their scriptures would all be superior to the Quran, the only one who actually proves that his testimony is valid is Yahowah, doing so through prophecy. Quran 21.025 We did not send any messenger before you, but we inspired him that there is no God but I, so worship me. In light of this, here is an offer no Muslim should want to refuse. If they can find a credible message from their God, whether it be from Allah, Rahman, or the Lord, in which said God demanding to be worshipped proves his/her divinity through valid prophecy without plagiarizing or 27 contradictions, I'll reward them with $1 million prize. There will be no winners, but there will continue to be millions upon billions of losers, the preponderance of whom will have deserved their fate. Quran 21.026 And they say, Ar-Rahman has begotten a son. Glory to him. Nay, they are but honored slaves. Trying to hide the Quran's identity crisis, the translators become copy editors. They either replaced Rahman's name with Allah or God when neither were mentioned, or they attempted to translate it as the most beneficent, Allah. Since only one of the 5 translations used to create the common compilation presented in Goddamn Religion rendered the statement accurately, it is obvious that the Islamic publishing houses are complicit in the fraud of the Quran. But it is to be expected, nay, they are but honored slaves. And the victorious Allahu Akbar of Islam's Trinity is a consummate liar, he never works alone. Without his slaves, he is nothing but a demonic blowhard. To promote the myth that he is God, the Lord Rahman/Allah must drive a herd of overburdened flea-bitten camels through the convoluted eye of a revisionist needle using ill-fitting implements while passing out warped and occluded glasses, hoping no one would actually look. Unable to perform a sign, offer a prophecy, produce a book, or find a credible messenger, even speak intelligently, the Islamic ungod must convince those he intends to deprive and enslave that he was the God of the Torah and prophets because they are replete with everything the snake is missing and covets. But that's a problem since Yahowah worked alongside his people, Torah guiding, teaching, instructing, and directing them along the way. And his path leads in the opposite direction, toward emancipation, not enslavement, to enrichment, not 28 impoverishment, to enlightenment rather than ignorance, and to shamaim, not shi'al. So, what was a snake to do? Quran 21.027 They speak not until he has spoken, and they act on his command. Quran 21.028 He knows what is before them, and what is behind them, and they cannot intercede except for him with whom he is pleased. And they stand in awe, terrified and trembling, for fear of him. Quran 21.029 And if any of them should say, Verily I am a god besides him, such a one we would award hell, for this is how we reward and repay the polytheists and wrongdoers. Acting more like Baal the Lord than Ar-Rahman the Merciful, Allah enslaved the mythical Jesus along with Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, David, Solomon, and the aforementioned, Elias. Problem solved. Just add a large dose of terror, and everyone trembles and falls prostrate before the snake. That is the essence of Allah, Islam, and the Quran. And should anyone doubt the deliberate deception, be humble before the God who ripped the earth out of the heavens, parting that which was previously one piece. Quran 21.030 Have not those who disbelieve known that the heavens and the earth were of one piece, when we parted them, and we have made of water everything living, will they not believe? Quran 21.031 And we have placed stabilizers, in the earth, firm mountains as it revolved with them lest it should shake. And we place broad highways for them to pass through, that they may find their way. Quran 21.032 And we have made the heaven a roof, safe and well guarded. Yet they turn away from its signs. While there are hundreds of billions of galaxies, each with over 100 billion stars, many replete with solar systems, all of which are comprised of an incalculable number of molecular parts, the space between them 29 exceeds that which might be considered unified by exceedingly vast distances. So sorry, snake, but it is always better to remain silent and appear stupid than it is to open your mouth and remove all doubt. Of the 9 proofs the ungod offered, 8 were completely wrong and the other was partially correct, and it was taken from the Torah. The universe was never one piece, even in its inception, since it began as energy without matter. There has been expansion as Yahowah explained, but no parting. Our solar system, including the Earth, is the product of a supernova explosion of a dying first-generation star whose energy passed through a nebula cloud of gas, water, and particulate. Life, as Yahowah explained, emerged in water, but it is made of a great deal more than just water. There are no earthly stabilizers, just the opposite. Tectonic plate movement is beneficial and conducive to life. The mountains are caused by it, so they do not prevent shaking. Highways were all created by men, not by God, real or imagined. And rather than showing the way, they provide many ways and many directions, some opposed to one another. The heavens, as mostly space, are the antithesis of a roof. And the skies are not guarded by stars or jinn, no matter how subservient they may all be to Allah's command. Therefore, in trying to step outside of the Torah to establish his turf, Islam's ungod did nothing more than demonstrate that he has no clue what he is talking about. And now, adding insult to injury, the completely unknowing, all unaware, brags. Quran 21.033 And he it is who has created the night and the day, and the sun and the moon, each in an orbit floating. Neither night nor day was created. They are products of the earth's rotation on its axis. The sun does not orbit but, instead, the earth. And neither the sun nor the moon 30-inch float. Stupid is as stupid says. What more should one expect from a reptile? Quran 21.034 And we granted not to any human being immortality before you, then if you die, would they live forever? Quran 21.035 Everyone is going to taste death, and we shall make a trial of you tempting you with evil and with good, and to us you will return. Death is Allah's gift to Muslims and those they kill. Causing it, inspiring it, and demanding it, are among the things he has mastered. Demon-possessed in the first moment of Islam while in the cave above Petra, one that existed there but not in Mecca, Muhammad thought himself to be immortal. Even when he tried to commit suicide, he failed. And no matter how many ruthless terrorist raids he led, he survived them all in an occupation that is not prone to longevity. Therefore, Allah couched his assault on life by fooling his messenger, suggesting that he might be the lone exception to the rule of death. It did not work out any better for him than it would for any other Muslim. Yahowah created evil so that we humans could exercise free will and make the choice to accept or reject him. God is not tempting or testing anyone with good or with evil. He made the truth known, and it is up to us to consider it or ignore it. The only thing we cannot do, at least without consequence, is change it. And that is what Satan did in the garden and what this snake is now attempting in the desert. Other than Adam and Chawwa, we do not begin our lives with God. And very few, less than 1 in a million, will be with him after their mortal lives conclude. Of those, only one, Adam, has the potential to return. But the Lord of the Islamic Trinity must lie and frighten his slaves into believing that he will attend to their 31 interrogation and torture if they do not capitulate. This is the reason for the threatened return on the day of resurrection. This voyage through the demonic mind of Allah has finally arrived at its intended destination. Quran 21.036 When the unbelievers see you they make fun of you, mocking you, ridiculing you, and scoffing at you. Is this the one who mentions your gods? And they would deny all mention of Ar-Rahman, disbelieving him. It had been a curiosity as to why the Quran, which was supposedly written before the universe was conceived as the final message, would be so fixated on the minutiae of one madman's struggle for credibility, leading to perverted sex, draconian power, and stolen plunder. All the while the answer was obvious, and it is made manifest by this never-ending argument. Since its inclusion undermines the Quran's credibility by repeatedly acknowledging that those who knew the non-prophet best mocked him, this dubious tactic was deployed exclusively for the original scoffers ridiculing him in Petra and Yathrib. The single most repetitive theme in the Quran, with some 400 iterations, while counterproductive today, was effective 1,400 years ago. Therefore, Allah wasn't actually as dumb as he now appears. He realized that he did not have to convince anyone today so long as he could beguile sufficient malcontents through taunts and bribes long ago. Once Muhammad prevailed through terror and forced himself on everyone else, silencing dissenting voices and enslaving others, the game was over for the Lord's slaves. To mock them then would cost the dissenter his head. All Allah needed was for the small band of misfits and marauders, these denizens of the desert, to become Muslims and then raise their swords over the heads of others. From there, gang mentality and fear, with a dash of terror, would do the trick and it would be game over. 32 Today, 1,400 years later, we are witnessing Satan's magnum opus with the impending destruction of Israel and the genocide of Jews, inspiring the final world war. This snake from the desert has even managed to get progressives the world over to fan hell's flames. Clever. It remains troubling, however, that the Islamic ungod doesn't seem to know if his name is Rahman or Allah, if he is one, me, and my in verse 37, or many, we and us in verse 35, or if he should converse in first or third person. But at this point in his quest to rise from snake to Lord, he is frustrated that no one believes him. So his retort is that man was just an afterthought, someone made in haste, as a pawn in the Lord's new pastime. Quran 21.037 Man is made of inordinate haste. Soon, I, Ar-Rahman, will show you my signs. Therefore, do not ask me to hasten the punishment. Quran 21.038 And they say, when will this promise if you are truthful? Quran 21.039 If only the unbelievers could apprehend the moment when they would not be able to ward off the fire from their faces and their backs, and they will not be helped. Perhaps Rahman meant to say that man is too hasty, but since he didn't, we'll allow the resulting slur deprecating humankind to stand. The reason, however, that Allah had to postpone providing a sign when one would have done he and his cause considerable good at the time, is because he couldn't produce one. He still cannot and has not. Quite frankly, at this point, he is challenged just to speak in a quasi-sane manner. Throughout the Quran, the threat never changes. Allah promises to burn the resurrected bodies of disbelievers forevermore. He dreams of burning their faces and their backs while they scream for the real God to help them. And this ungod is a sneaky bastard, in addition to being a relentless sadist. And so the brandstifter exclaimed. 33 Quran 21.040 Nay, it will come upon them unawares, confounding and stupefying them, and they will not be able to avert it nor will they get respite. It is a bit depressing to realize that 1/4 of the earth's population believes that there is a God so deranged that he would resurrect humankind just so that he could torture men forever. And all but perhaps a score of men and women are either so unconcerned or immoral, that they will not lift a finger to stop the ensuing carnage. There is but a single spirit who would make such claims, and through religion and politics, he has managed to play the world for fools. And in this case, ignorance is not bliss. So the "what's my name" game continued. Quran 21.041 Mocked were messengers before you, but the scoffers were surrounded by what they had ridiculed. Quran 21.042 Say, who guards you from Ar-Rahman, the beneficent Allah, by night and by day? Nay, from a mention of their Lord they turn away. Quran 21.043 Or do they have gods of their own who can shield them from us, defending them, from our torment? They turned away because they knew that this Ar-Rahman was not the merciful God of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Jacob whom they had come to know through the Torah. Yahowah's messengers mocked, but they were not ridiculed. Elia is a case in point. He demeaned the religious and political of his day using sarcasm to point out the foolishness of believing the kind of false gods presented within the Quran. The religious and political who did not like what Yahowah's prophets revealed, were never surrounded because they have always been the majority. But in all of that time, never was a god needed to protect anyone from God, until this snake struck. 34 Quran 21.044 Nay, we gave the luxuries of this life to these men and their fathers until the period grew long for them. See they not that we gradually reduce the land from its outlying borders? Is it then they who will overcome and prevail? This discloses Allah's other problem. Slavery is ultimately counterproductive and destructive. Socialist and communist governments are ineffective and inefficient compared to free enterprise. Therefore, those unaffected by Islam's submission are more prosperous, which generates envy. Recognizing what should be obvious, indeed because the lack of incentive makes it inevitable, and yet is nevertheless ignored by Muslims and progressives, the Lord of Submission claims that the relative success of non-believers is a temporary gift that he is denying Muslims. Then he states that the superiority of slavery will be manifest by the territory of non-submissive shrinking. But what he failed to mention is that this would occur through brute force, through the imposition of swords, through terrorism, rape, plunder, and mass murder. Quran 21.045 Say, I am warning you by the revelation. But the deaf do not hear the call when they are warned. Quran 21.046 And if a breath, a whiff or blast of the torment and punishment of the Lord were to touch them they would surely say, Ah, alas for us, lo and woe, we were wrongdoers. Why go through this charade when everyone's fate was supposed to be predestined? Was Rahman unaware of Allah's shtick? Why lecture the slaves about the fate of righties and lefties if the wrongies are supposed to heed the warning to avert being tortured by the Lord? In this case, the Lord's torment is supposedly so egregious that a sniff of the aroma of burnt flesh would be sufficient to traumatize the infidels awaiting their chance to serve as faggots for the fire while confessing that they 35 deserved eternal torment. And make no mistake, this torture is being administered by the God of the Quran. This immoral threat was weighed on fixed scales. Quran 21.047 And we will fix the scales on the balance of justice on the day of resurrection so that none will be wronged in aught. Though it be of the weight of a grain of mustard seed, we bring it. And we suffice for computation. Only in Islam can a scale be fixed and not be unjust. Only in Islam is being burnt alive, which is the lone outcome of this farce, not wrong. Only in Islam is evidence replaced by a demon's computation. Grasping for profits, Rahman claims the man who was responsible for revealing Yahowah's name to his people. It takes chutzpah to perpetrate a fraud of this magnitude. And it takes an idiot to believe him. Quran 21.048 And lo, verily, we granted to Musa and Harun, Moses and Aaron, the criterion and a shining light and a reminder for those who guard. Quran 21.049 Who are fearful of their Lord inwardly and secretly, and dread the hour. Quran 21.050 And this is a blessed reminder which we have sent down, will you then, dare to, deny it? To believe that the Lord of the Quran was involved in granting anything to Moses or Aaron, much less the criterion for life, necessitates a level of ignorance and irrationality unparalleled in the human experience. It is, under these circumstances, impossible to express sympathy for Muslims. This surah, inappropriately named, The Prophets, commences with yet another 47-verse rendition of the never-ending argument. That is to acknowledge that the surahs that comprise the Quran are variations on the same theme, merely different recollections of the same ridiculous recital. Now, stealing the reputation of the man 36 Yahowah immortalized through the covenant and in his Torah, Rahman now lies. Quran 21.051 And lo, we bestowed aforetime on Abraham his guidance, for we knew him well. Quran 21.052 When he said to his father and his people, What are these images, to which you are devoted? Quran 21.053 They said, We found our fathers worshipping them. Quran 21.054 He said, Lo, verily, you and your fathers have been in manifest error. Quran 21.055 They said, Have you brought us the truth, or are you some jester? This Quranic foolery emerges without reference to the audience, place, time, or nature of the offending religion. Devoid of this context, while replete with dubious dialogue, these verses are as unreasonable today as they were unconvincing yesterday. In a literate world, this rubbish should be rejected and ridiculed. However, since an accurate accounting would have been devastating to the Quran's agenda, the lives of these individuals were reconstituted such that they would serve the Lord's craving to be worshipped as if he were a god in the forsaken deserts of Arabia. Every narrative was perverted such that it replicates Muhammad's struggles in Petra and Yathrib, as is the case here. The agenda is not veiled, but plain to see. In the Torah, Abraham listens to Yahowah and responds to him. And since the Berith covenant was the sole purpose of their relationship, and it was and remains personal, Abraham has no reason to engage in any public debate. Further, Abraham had no knowledge of Yahowah and Ur, and would not come to know him until he had left and was on his way to Haran. Their relationship would then develop within the promised land. 37 Quran 21.056 He said, Nay, your Rabbi Lord is the Lord of the heavens and earth, who created them, and I am a witness to this. Quran 21.057 And by Allah that to him, I shall plot a plan, to destroy or circumvent, your idols after you have gone away and turned your backs. Quran 21.058 So he broke them to pieces, all, except the biggest of them, so that they might turn to it. Rather than building his case for monotheism and against idolatry, Islam's second of three gods is promoting what he claims to detest. Speaking before pagans in the presence of their idols, Ibrahim validates their religion, telling them that their Lord is the Lord of the heavens and earth. He then claims to have witnessed this, which takes us to his claims that the sun, moon, and stars were his Lord when they rose in the sky. Moreover, Ibrahim is now the dim-witted schemer as opposed to the one being plotted against. He allegedly tells his undisclosed audience that he plans to do something unspecified to their idols as soon as they turn their backs. The reason that this story of the destructive and dishonest Abraham appears in the Talmud and the Quran, but not in the Torah, is because it is religious, counter to Yahowah's instructions, and did not occur. Quran 21.059 They said, who has done this to our gods? He is a mischief-monger and wrongdoer. Quran 21.060 They said, we heard a young man talking them who is called Ibrahim. Quran 21.061 They said, then bring him before the eyes of the people, that they may testify. Quran 21.062 They said, did you do this to our gods, O Ibrahim? Quran 21.063 He said, no. This one, the biggest of them did it. Ask them in case they can speak. 38 Quran 21.064 So they turned to themselves and said, lo, verily, you are the polytheist, wrongdoer, and disbeliever. Quran 21.065 Then they turned to themselves, lo, you know well that these speak not. Quran 21.066 He said, do you then worship besides Allah to him, things that can neither profit you nor harm you? Quran 21.067 Fie on you and those you worship besides Allah. Have you no sense? Quran 21.068 They said, burn him, and save your gods, if you will be doing. Quran 21.069 We said, O fire be you coolness and peace to Ibrahim. Quran 21.070 They wished to entrap him, desiring a stratagem of war on him, but we made them the greater losers. Since Allah never spoke, why didn't that shame the first Muslims who heard this nonsense? And why would the supposed patriarch of monotheistic religion lie and tell his people that a pagan god smashed lesser idols? Would that not make the idol real and Ibrahim a deceiver? Equally troubling, the Quranic Abraham called a God false because it cannot harm you. The implication is that the Lord/Rahman/Allah were real because they were sadistic terrorists. Also incriminating, here we learn that gods can be saved by burning men. Pushing this fable to the point of absurdity, Islam's ungod is unable to put out the fire. So he issued commands for fire, which is comprised of radiant energy, to be what it cannot be, cool. Then what began poorly ends worse. Quran 21.071 And we delivered him and Lot to the land of Israel, which we have blessed for men and jinn. I suppose the Quran's blessing for Israel is genocide against them. We all witnessed this Muslim godsend on October 7, 2023, replete with burning Jewish women and children alive. It was so Islamic of them. 39 The 25th Surah, curiously named Al-Furqan the Criterion, continues to speak of the lordly confusion over the identity of the Islamic deity but not his psychosis. By any name, he claims to be the terrorist who obliterated the mythical people Ad, the mud, and Ars, destroying them after administering warnings. Quran 025.038-039, then. Quran 25.040 And indeed they surely have passed by the town on which was rained the evil rain. Did they not then see it? Nay, but they used not to expect for any resurrection. Quran 25.041 And when they see you they treat you only as a mockery. Is this the one whom God has sent as a messenger? Quran 25.042 He would have nearly misled us from our gods had it not been that we're patient and adhere to them in constant worship. They will soon know who is farther away from the path when they see our punishment and behold our doom. Quran 25.043 Have you seen him who takes his own lust for his God? Can you stand a surety for him? Quran 25.044 Or do you think that most of them hear or understand? They are no better than cattle. They are even further from the path. Surely not. No one has seen the town of evil rain because neither it nor your delusional downpour exists. But at least Rahman is consistent because neither does the resurrection. The mockery of messengers wouldn't be such a problem for the ungod of the Quran if he didn't say so many things deserving ridicule. If it were not for the propensity of Muslims to follow their Lord's example and engage in murder and mayhem, we would all have better things to do with our time. Credible dialogue is difficult to compose and should not be attempted by those who are inept such as the Lord of Islam. This is some of the worst I've ever read. But that is not to suggest that it was worthless. We find another affirmation in this version of the never-ending argument 40 that the promised punishment is perpetrated by the Islamic God, himself. And since he works alone, he is a sadist. Also, we found that the Quran degrades people, placing them into three categories: slaves, cattle, apes, and swine. Here, the cows are better guided than men. After orbiting suns, floating moons, ripped skies, and stabilizers, evil rain and better guided cattle, rather than prophecy, lengthening shadows is another proof. Quran 25.045 Have you not seen how your Lord spread the shadow? If he willed, he could have made it motionless if he liked. We have made the sun its pilot to show the way. Quran 25.046 Then we withdraw it to us, a gradual concealed withdrawal, taking little by little. Quran 25.047 And it is he who makes the night a covering for you, and sleep repose, and make the day nushur a resurrection. Quran 25.048 And it is he who sends the winds as good news in advance of his benevolence, and we send pure water down from the sky. Quran 20.049 that we may give life to a dead land, and we give to drink thereof many of the cattle and men that we had created. Quran 25.050 and, verily, we have repeated it amongst them in order that they may remember and celebrate our praises, yet most men disdain everything but denial and ingratitude. Surely, no one believed that the varying length of shadows during the day was a sign of God manipulating their length. And once again, the sun serves its master, piloting to show the way, at least prior to it being withdrawn and concealed by the Islamic magician. As a result, night is a blanket and day a resurrection. Winds in the desert, rather than being blinding and blistering, are heralds of benevolence. The dead earth is revived by the Lord offering it a drink. Repeat and recycle these tokens so that Rahman may be praised. 41 Assuming that 10% of the towns and cities that have ever existed are around today, Rahman was prepared to offer 40 million messengers. Quran 25.051 Had we pleased, we would have raised a warner in every town. Quran 25.052 So obey not the disbelievers, and strive against them with the greater effort and the utmost striving, strenuously with it. Quran 25.053 It is he who made two bodies of water flow side by side, one fresh sweet, the other brine bitter, and has placed an interstice, a barrier between them. Quran 25.054 It is he who has created man from water, and then gave him consanguinity and affinity by blood and marriage. Your Lord is omnipotent. Strive hard and fight against the infidels because, well, if you don't one of them might poke lots of holes in the Quran and embarrass us. As for the proof of saline and freshwater coexisting side by side, not a chance in hell. And water is the 10th in a long list of erroneous compounds from which man was made according to Rahman. But at least now we know that this gave him consanguinity and the Lord is very impotent. Quran 25.055 And they worship besides Allah, that which can neither profit them nor harm them, and the disbeliever is ever a helper against his Lord. Quran 25.056 And we have sent you only as a bearer of glad tidings and a warner. Quran 25.057 Say, no reward do I ask of you for this, save that whoever likes may take the way to his Lord. Quran 25.058 And put your trust in the ever-living one who dies not, and glorify his praises, and sufficient is he as the all-knower of the sins of his slaves. Quran 25.059 Who created the heavens and the earth and all that is between them in 6 days. Then he rose and assumed his 42 authority over the throne. He is Ar-Rahman. Ask those who are informed concerning him. Quran 25.060 And when it is said to them, bow prostrate before Ar-Rahman, they say, what is Ar-Rahman? Should we fall down prostrate before whoever you command us? Their aversion increases further. So what now, Allah-fearing slave? Who is your God? Is he Baal, the Lord of religion whom Yahowah condemns? Or is he Rahman, the God of the Sabaean converts to Judaism whose scriptures were stolen? It appears that your God has an identity crisis. Please consider this warning a herald of good tidings. I ask nothing of you, and unlike Muhammad, I will not rob you nor will I enslave you. Lo, verily, I intend to liberate God's people from you. Ar-Rahman got something right. He, as Satan, whether in the guise of the Lord or Allah, is immortal. Rather than die, he will be dragged kicking and screaming to Sheol hell, to the applause of many. I've studied Yahowah's testimony regarding creation to the extent of translating it 10 times, but I do not recall seeing a throne in that story. God's focus was on man, not himself. As for Ar-Rahman, it is apparent that Muhammad stole the God of the people of Towrah. But now that everyone is commanded to prostrate themselves to him, they say that you can keep him. I rather prefer my father's approach to Ar-Rahman, with whom I'm admittedly averse. But then, again, I'm no fan of Satan. I don't care for astrology either. Quran 25.061 Blessed by he who has placed in the heavens constellations of stars, and has placed therein a great lamp, and a moon giving in shining light. Quran 25.062 And he it is who has put the night and the day in succession, for such who desires to remember or desires to show his gratitude. 43 Quran 25.063 And the slaves of Ar-Rahman are those who walk on the earth in humility and when they are addressed by the ignorant, say, peace. Quran 25.064 And those who spend the night before their Lord, bowed, prostrate and standing. Quran 25.065 And those who say, Our Lord, avert from us the doom of hell. Lo! Verily, its afflicting anguish is ever an inseparable, permanent punishment. Quran 25.066 Evil indeed it is an abode and as a place to dwell, rest, and stay. Speaking of an identity crisis, why did we become he? Why is this directed at Ar-Rahman when Allah is supposed to be the one and only God? Is Rahman his partner, his alter ego, his sidekick, a nom de plume, or just a convenient alias when trying to avoid prosecution? Why does the Quranic Trinity speak of constellations, when they are based on the overtly pagan religion of astrology and not of galaxies which are understood through astronomy? Where is the lamp? Why is the moon said to give light rather than reflect it? Is Ar-Rahman wobbling on scientific training wheels? Does he really expect to be worshipped because night follows day? There are, however, worthy insights along the way. Ar-Rahman's slaves, better known as Muslims, have been ordered to tell those who are ignorant of Islam that theirs is a religion of peace. Where have we heard that before? Bow to this demented deity, not a chance in hell. And if you want to avoid joining the Lord there, you may want to tell him that he can go to hell on his own. After all, it's a generous offer because he seems to like being alone. But don't let Satan scare you. He isn't going to be tormenting anyone except himself. This Quranic struggle over God's name was hardly academic. Since several gods are named, Islam can't be 44 monotheistic. And since none of the names are Yahowah, there isn't a God among them. In the last days in Petra preceding the Satanic verses, Rahman was a rock star. Quran 13.001 Alif Lam Mim Ra, these are a miracle of the Quran and none by Allah knows their meanings. These are the verses of the book, and that which has been revealed unto you from your rabbi is the truth, but most men believe not. This is Islam's monotheistic trinity, that is assuming one or more of these fake gods was also the Lord, who we know is Satan. The letters Alif Lam Mim Ra are Arabic copies of the Hebrew letters Aleph, Lamed, Mem, and Rosh. Aleph Lamed Mem spells alam, which means bound and dumb, easily controlled but unable to speak appropriately. Since the Rosh was drawn to depict a human head, it seems that the Lord is besmirching his messenger and his audience. As for a scripture book, I beg to differ. The Islamic Trinity was not able to produce one and the Lord's illiterate messenger could not write one either. Although, it was not entirely untrue, most men believe not. And that is a good thing, something Yahowah and I want to encourage. Speaking of the Lord's prowess in third person singular, perhaps one of the other gods offered this proof. Quran 13.002 Allahu is he who raised the heavens without any visible support pillars that you can see. Then he firmly mounted the throne. He enthralled and subjected, compelling, the sun and the moon. Each runs to a predetermined course for a term appointed. He regulates and disposes all affairs, distinctly explaining the signs and proofs in detail that you may believe with certainty in the meeting with your Lord. This surah begins with as a word salad. There is an identity crisis and a communication blunder followed by a scientific anomaly and beastly depiction, leading to an 45 astronomical error and egomaniacal boast. Such are the signs affirming that Allah is the curse of the adversary. Having mounted his throne and serving as Atlas holding up the heavens, speaking in third person, the ungod continues to trip on his forked tongue. Quran 13.003 And he it is who spread out the earth and placed therein it mountainous stabilizers, and rivers and of every kind of fruits he made Zawjayn name two in pairs, may mean two kinds or it may mean of two sorts, e.g. black and white, sweet and sour, small and big. He brings the night as a cover over the day. Lo, verily, in these things, there are signs and proofs for people who reflect. Has there ever been a narcissist with a smaller brain? Is this the dumbest wannabe god in the history of religion? In creating his persona and inspiring his diatribe, was the snake this stupid or was he simply playing his slaves for fools, showing God that they were not worth the effort? Under the circumstances, these are appropriate questions. There is but one sign displayed in the Quran, and it reads, danger do not believe this. Quran 13.004 And in the earth are adjoining neighboring tracts, and vineyards, fields of plowed lands, and date palms, growing out two or three from a single stem root, like and unlike or otherwise watered with the same water, yet some of them we make more excellent than others in fruit. Lo! Verily, herein are signs and proof for the people to understand. Having flunked astronomy, Allah is failing geology and biology. Surely he won't continue to stumble in literacy and theology, too. Quran 13.005 And if you are surprised, then astonishing is the speech. Having turned to dust shall we be raised as a new creation. They are those who disbelieve in their Lord. They are those who will have iron chains tying their hands to their necks. They will be inmates of hell, dwellers of the fire, where they will abide forever, 46 There has never been a more demented deity or a psychotic sadist positioned in the role of God. Shame on Muslims for prostrating themselves to this devil in drag. Quran 13.006 They ask you to hasten the evil before the good, yet exemplary punishments have occurred before them. But, lo, verily, your Lord is full of forgiveness for mankind in spite of their wrongdoing. And verily, your rabbi is severe in punishment. It is a wee little carrot and a great big stick both displayed by a pathetic spirit trying to terrorize Muslims into submission. Don't bite, and you will not be beaten. So now after bragging and taunting, it's time to play the never-ending argument again. Quran 13.007 The disbelievers say, why is not a sign sent down to him from his Lord? You are only a warner, and to every people a guide. Quran 13.008 Allah knows what every female bears, and by how much the wombs fall short or do exceed. Everything with him is measured and proportional. Quran 13.009 He is the knower of the known and unknown, the most great, the most high. Quran 13.010 It is the same whether any of you conceal his speech or declare it openly, whether he hid by night or goes forth freely by day. Quran 13.011 For each, there are angels in succession, before and behind him. They guard him by Allah's command. Verily, Allah will not change the state of a people till they change. But when Allah wills a people's punishment, there can be no turning back of it, and they will find besides him no protector. There have been war gods and love gods, clever gods and dumb gods, party-hardy gods and austere gods, but prior to Islam, there had never been a psychopath positioned as a god. So, at least Allah is unique. As a demon pretending to be divine, Allah is naturally paranoid. That is why he has dispatched his 47 angelic Gestapo to guard the convicts as they are escorted to Hell's concentration camp, where the rabbi is Hell's warden and head of torture operations. He is a rain god, too, with lightning bolts and thunder at the ready. Quran 13.012 It is he who makes the lightning flash for fear and as a hope. And it is he who brings up the heavy clouds. Quran 13.013 The thunder sings his praises, and the angels too, for fear of him. He sends thunderbolts and strikes whosoever he wills with them. Even then, they dispute about Allah. But he is mighty in strength and severe in punishment. Having auditioned poorly for the role of God, Satan is directing his appeal to Zeus. Damn the disbelievers, it is a darn good portrayal. Quran 13.014 Lahu for him is the real prayer. Those whom they pray beside him respond to them not at all, save as one who stretches forth his hands toward water that it may come unto his mouth, and it will never reach it. The prayer of disbelievers is nothing but wandering. Why is it that Muslims fail to acknowledge that Allah has never answered a prayer? And that's surprising considering the number of prostrations. Quran 13.015, and unto Allah falls in prostration whoever is in the heavens and the earth, willingly or unwillingly, and so do their shadows in the mornings and in the afternoons. Quran 13.016 Say, who is the Rabbi of the heavens and the earth? Say, Allahu. Say, then why do you take protectors besides him who have no power over their own gain or harm to themselves? Say, is the blind equal to the one who sees? Or darkness equal to the light? Or do they assign to Allah partners who created the like of his creation, so that the creation seemed alike to them? Say, Allahu is the creator of all things. He is the one, the irresistible, the omnipotent. We are asked if it is better to be blind or see. And based upon what we've read thus far in the Quran and seen of it in action, it's not an easy assessment. We've watched as 48 Muslims raped and pillaged, kidnapped, tortured, mutilated, and murdered their way through Israel on October 7th and have seen Muslims worldwide celebrate their bestiality. So, let's be honest, Allah is anything but irresistible or omnipotent. Repulsive and impotent would be more accurate. But let's not let facts get in the way of faith when there are people to deceive, terrorize, rape, plunder, enslave, and murder. Muslims must keep busy. And speaking of it, Allah is a full-service provider for the denizens of the desert. Although, I check for rabies since he appears to be foaming at the mouth. Quran 13.017, he sends down water from the sky, and the valleys flow according to their measure, but the flood bears away the foam that mounts up to the surface, and from that which they heat in the fire in order to make utensils rises a foam like unto it. Thus does Allah show forth truth and falsehood. Then, as for the foam it passes away as scum upon the banks while that which is useful to man remains in the earth. Thus Allah sets forth parables. Waterborne fires quenched, scum aside, and parables duly noted, be forewarned all who are hellbound. Quran 13.018, for those who obey their Lord is bliss in al-husna paradise. But those who fail to obey, if they had all that is in the earth, and therewith the like thereof, they would proffer it as ransom. Such will have a woeful and terrible reckoning, and their abode will be hell, a dire place for rest. I'll take a pass on bliss in Allah's brothel for many reasons, one of which is that I would not trust a pimp who would rather torture someone than accept a ransom. I mean, even the Catholics sold indulgences. More riddles. Who wants to answer this one? Quran 13.019, is he who knoweth that what is revealed unto thee from thy Lord is the truth like him who is blind? But only men of understanding mind. 49 Quran 13.020 Those who fulfill the covenant, pact, or promise of Allah and do not break mithaq bond and treaty, their plighted word and oath of binding allegiance. Quran 13.021 Such as unite that which Allah has commanded to be joined, fear their Lord, and dread the reckoning. Quran 13.022 And those who persevere in seeing their Lord, who perform their prayers and devotional obligations and spend of what we have given them, secretly or openly, who defend evil with good, for such there is a sequel of the abode. Quran 13.023 Adn Eden gardens which they enter and those who do good from among their fathers, and their wives, and their offspring. And angels shall enter unto them from every gate. Quran 13.024 Solomon alaikum peace be unto you for that you preserved. How excellent the recompense of the abode. Allah has tried to steal everything from Yahowah, including his position as God, so why not the covenant too? But to be fair, covenant in Hebrew is berith, meaning family relationship. This is a mithaq which, as a Persian loan word, is a binding oath of a different order as it requires swearing allegiance to Allah, the Terrible. At least he is being honest admitting that prayers are nothing but a performance. They are obligatory acts of submission. Moreover, Allah expects his slaves to spend on his cause, which is defined as killing infidels. In these words, the Quran's Hebrew is showing. Adn is Eden and Solomon is from Shalom. But no matter the vocabulary, enough with the false promises of Mr. Nice God, it's time to release the curse of the real Allah. Quran 13.025 And those who break the mithaq with Allah, their binding pledge, after validating it, and sever relations which Allah commanded should be joined, and work mischief in the land, on them is the curse. And for them is the unhappy abode. This is reminiscent of the American Civil War where states were free to join the Union but not free to leave it. The same is true for Islam. Any Muslim who repudiates his 50 or her faith is to be hunted down and killed. Islam is a death cult, after all. And according to Allah, the most intense fires in hell await former, peaceful, and hypocritical Muslims. Quran 13.026 Allah increases the livelihood for whom he will and straightens, and they rejoice in the life of the world, whereas the life of this world as compared with the hereafter is but a passing enjoyment. Should a Muslim be successful, then the ungod who has no partners must have unpartnered with them. And be aware that the hellish conditions prevalent throughout the fascist world of Islamic despots are but a taste of what awaits them in the hereafter. Evidently, Allah is as inept in the Islamic heaven as he is impotent on earth. Also, Allah is playing both sides against one another in the never-ending argument. Quran 13.027 And those who disbelieve say, why is not a sign sent down to him from his rabbi? Say, verily, Allah sends astray and guides to himself those who turn. Quran 13.028 Those who believe and whose hearts have rest in the remembrance of Allah, verily, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. I vote we take up a collection and hire a ghostwriter for the Lord. He could use the help and they ought to get along famously. Now, keeping in mind that believing requires surrendering to the devil and good works are defined as killing for him, we find this tribute to the historical founder of Islam, Tubba. Quran 13.029 Those who believe and do good, tuba a good state shall be theirs and a goodly return. This takes us to the schizophrenic pronouncement which brought us to the 13th surah, Arra the thunder. After speaking in third-person singular, the Lord slips back into the more familiar first-person plural during this identity crisis. 51 Quran 13.030 Thus we have sent you to a people, community, or nation before whom other nations have passed away in order that you might recite unto them whatever we have revealed to you, while they disbelieve in Ar-Rahman. Say, He is my Lord, La ilaha illa huwa no God but Him. In Him is my trust and to Him is my reversion. There is no record of Allah communicating with anyone anywhere, not in Petra, Mecca, or Medina, nor with any other community or nation past and present. The message allegedly revealed to Muhammad was infinitely worse than anything the world had previously endured. As for Rahman, he is clearly the rabbi. He is credited with revealing the Quran. He is the object of infidel disbelief. There is no God but Him. And for you Arabic advocates, the slogan is comprised of the Hebrew words la-il, ha-il and hu, a preposition, noun, article, and pronoun. The incorporation of Rahman, the god of Arab monotheism, and Allah, the anti-Semitic terrorist who would arise so viciously in Yathrib, occurred at the end of the 17th surah, Al-Isra, Israel. It was surprisingly clever for a reptile. So let's show our due respect for this sleight of hand and bit of verbal ambiguity and not take annihilation of the Quranic trinity out of context. The surah attempts to explain why the Quran was being doled out in increments. It begins by lying, which is to be expected. Quran 17.001 Glorified and exalted, is, the one who took his slave, by, night from Al-Masjid al-Haram to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, the surrounds we blessed that we might show him our signs and proofs. Lo! Verily, He, Himself, the All-Hearer, the All-Seer. This is addressing one of the most insane and inane of all Quranic claims, and yet it is the trigger that led directly to the malicious terrorist massacre in Israel by Islamic terrorists on October 7, 2023. Out of character and speaking in third-person singular, the Islamic ungod is claiming to have escorted his slave. Having read the 52 hadiths explanation of this preposterous episode, Allah must be the winged ass, which seems reasonable. Therefore, the Lord of Islam with his slave astride, took flight from Al-Masjid al-Haram, the forbidden mosque. That is an embarrassment to Islam, not only because the name speaks of a place of forbidden prostrations but there never was a mosque in Petra, nor was there even one in the mythical Mecca at this time. Furthermore, there was no mosque anywhere else on earth in 622 CE, and that would include Jerusalem, which was not named in the Quran. Since neither location was identified, and neither mosque existed, since the flying donkey mule was a myth, and since the night's journey did not occur, what else might lo? Verily have made up, Allah being God, the Quran being an inspired book, or Muhammad being a messenger? Or is the answer, all of this and more? And if we were to play along regarding this aerial assault on our intelligence, what would the Lord have shown his slave? In 622 CE, Jerusalem was abandoned and in ruins. What the Romans didn't destroy in 70 CE, and again in 133 CE, the earthquake in 363 CE reduced to rubble. Was that the blessing? Did Allah intend to suggest that he was Rome and destroyed Yehuda Judah? That would be odd since by 622 CE Rome had been ravaged and the Byzantines were Roman Catholics. And if Petra/Mecca was the home of Allah's house, the Qusayy, why leave there to visit heaven? More to the point of this bizarre pronouncement, if Allah escorted his slave, why did Muhammad have to go to Jerusalem, pass through hell and 7 heavens to finally meet with Allah? Do all Muslims take a stupid pill before reading the Quran? Ever the delusional and disingenuous one, Allah is now claiming that he was Yahowah, because that is who met with Moses, his explanation of his name, the 53 depiction of the mission, and the subsequent composition of the Torah were not only memorialized in writing, we have many copies of the Torah dating to 1000 years before the first Quran. Therefore, since this is outlandish and easily disproven, how many lies does Allah have to make before Muslims stop believing him? Quran 17.002, and we gave Musa the book and made it a guidance for the children of Israel, take not other than me as wakeful disposer of affairs. Quran 17.003 O offspring of those whom we carried with Na, in the ship. Lo! Verily, he was a grateful slave. Quran 17.004 And we decreed for the children of Israel in the book that verily, you will work corruption in the earth twice, and you will become great tyrants and exceedingly arrogant. Yahowah revealed the Torah to Moses who was scribe and orator, prophet and partner. There is no mention of we or me as a wakeful disposer of affairs. Likewise, Noach listened to Yahowah and engaged as instructed. At no time was Noach a slave or was Allah aboard the Arkansas. Yisrael has been contentious against Yahowah for millennia, but the prophecies pertaining to them speak of their restoration and return and not of continual corruption. This will occur as the Berith covenant is reaffirmed in concert with the Torah teaching on Yom Kippurim. And while Jews have been ravaged by tyrants, even to this day, they have never been tyrants. Without exception, everything Allah has stated thus far is invalid. The snake continues to spew nothing but toxic delusions. For example, it is hypocritical for Satan to complain about arrogance, since it was his unbridled conceit that caused him to present himself as the god of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Everything he has said of himself in the Quran represents the most extreme expression of pride the world has known. A snake is not 54 God, not almighty, not all-knowing, not most merciful, not oft-forgiving, not the creator, not nothing but a repulsive reptilian serpent. It is ingenuous for Allah to claim something he revealed in 612 CE was a prophecy fulfilled in 702 BCE. That would be like someone today predicting the fall of Rome and bragging about it. Quran 17.005 So, when the time of the first prediction came, we sent against you our slaves full of martial might and terrible warfare, who entered the very innermost parts of your homes and ransacked your cities, and the prediction was fulfilled. For this to be true, the Assyrians would have to have been Muslims. I wonder why they didn't mention it. Quran 17.006, then we gave you a chance of victory against them. And we helped you with wealth and children and made you more numerous in numbers of militants. This is an admission that the Quran was compiled after the fact. At this point in Petra, following the Satanic verses and Knight's Journey, there are a handful of Muslims. They were poor as dirt. They were not reproducing. There had yet to be a single jihadist. And between Petra and Yathrib, they were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. There had been no victories, large or small. This would not change until the imminent migration to Yathrib in shame when Allah's slaves became ruthless terrorists. In the ensuing verses, Allah rants incoherently about Israel and then reverts to his favorite topic, obliterating humans, annihilating them, only to resurrect them and burn them all over again. And since there is only so much of this that either of us can stand, let's jump ahead to the incorporation of Ar-Rahman into Allah. It comes at the very end of a horrendous surah. Quran 17.106, and a Quran which we have divided that you may recite it to men at intervals. And we revealed it by stages. 55 inches a rational world, the Quran cannot be both a book and a staged recital. Pick one or the other. But in reality, it cannot be either. With the 17th surah, we are ready to leave Petra along with the 96 surahs revealed therein. It was the flight of fancy depicted at the outset of this surah and its focus on Israel, even the promise to overpower them, which demonstrates that Ar-Rahman was ready to become Allah, stretch his wings and become a real terrorist. But no matter how hard they try, there are no intelligent divisions among them. No one knows in what order they were revealed. The stage's argument is as fallacious as the notion of sensible divisions. What we find is that issues in Muhammad's life drove the revelations. When he had no followers and needed Ar-Rahman to rebuke the mockers, the ungod did so. Moving to Yathrib, when he wanted to steal, booty was approved. When he wanted to kill, his God inspired genocide. When he craved incest, his lust was conveniently satisfied. When he wanted more wives than Islam allowed, the Quran provided a special dispensation. And when he wanted to cleanse the world of Jews, his God was accommodating. Quran 17.107, say, believe in it or do not believe. Lo! Those who were given knowledge before it, when it is recited to them, bow in adoration, falling down on their faces in humble prostration. Quran 17.108 and, they, say, glory be to our Lord. Verily, the promise of our Lord must be fulfilled. Quran 17.109 and they fall down on their faces, weeping, and this increases their submission and adds to their humility. Islam's ungod is confused, and the Quran is muddled. Since Jews do not prostrate themselves to the Talmud which is much better than these recitals, or the Torah which is infinitely superior, no Jew would ever bow to this repulsive repudiation of them and their God, especially since it glorifies exterminating them. 56 Turning then to Christians, whose New Testament Allah ignorantly equates to the Torah, since they don't worship their book, they wouldn't have bowed to this ridiculous transformation of Isa Jesus into an uncrucified Muslim preaching Islam. This is clearly a desperate ploy at a desperate time. Adding insult to injury, the Lord of the Quran seems to have forgotten his principal claim, one presented with irritating repetition. Everyone who listened to this non-prophet's recital mocked him, realizing that he was a complete fraud and likely demonic. So, rather than bowing down in support, they were rolling around in laughter. Particularly relevant, in Petra at this time, the audience would have been comprised of Christians, along with a few Jews, and some Arab monotheists and pagans. They were all on the opposing side of the never-ending argument. Therefore, the ungod is impugning his own story, demonstrating that the Quran was compiled elsewhere a century after the Knight's Journey in Hijrah, and that the Hadith is essential to comprehending this incomplete recital. The editors of the noble Quran inserted the Jews and the Christians like Abdullah bin Salam and Salman al-Farisi. But that is not possible. The three stories regarding Abdullah bin Salam are conflicting. In the first, it is said that he was a Jew preaching in a non-existent Petran/Meccan synagogue about Moses' prophecy regarding a coming prophet in Dabram/Deuteronomy 18 verse 15, although they were unaware of the citation. As this version unfolds, Abdullah bin Salam, which even according to the Hadith was a fictitious name, in the immediate aftermath of the Satanic verse fiasco in which Muhammad added three of Petra's goddesses, Al-Lat, Manat, and Al-Uzza to his Quranic trinity of Rahman, Rabbi, and Allah, to Islam and then bolted on his fabulous and fantastical knight's journey, met the forlorn Warner in Kuba, which did not exist either. 57 But not letting the facts get in the way of a bad story, we find this pretense of a Jew allegedly proclaiming the Shahada there is only one God and Muhammad is his messenger upon the non-prophet's arrival. Then he told his auntie, he is really, by God, the brother of Moses and follows his religion. Hugh's Dictionary of Islam, Abdullah ibn Salam, Moses was anti-religious and Muhammad was not a Levite. The more credible variation of this incredulous story was collected by Ibn Ishaq, Muhammad ibn Ishaq, Sirat Rasul Allah, translated by Guillaume, A. 1955, The Life of Muhammad pages 240-241, Oxford University Press. It suggests that Salam's conversion occurred in 630 in Yathrib and not in 622. This would have been around the time Muhammad decapitated every Jewish man in the city. A third variation splits the gap in time, and has the great capitulation occurring during the triumphant first coming of the wannabe Messiah. A hadith.co.uk hadith no. 3251 narrated on authority of Abdullah bin Salam, when the Prophet came to Al-Madinah, actually, Yathrib, the people rushed to meet him, and it was said, the Messenger of Allah has come. The Messenger of Allah has come. The Messenger of Allah has come. 3 times. I came with the people to see him, and when I saw his face clearly, I knew that his face was not the face of a liar. The first thing I heard him say was when he said, O people! Spread salam, feed others, uphold the ties of kinship, and pray during the night when people are sleeping, and you will enter paradise with salam. Ahadith.co.uk Hadith No. 3734, narrated on authority of Abdullah bin Salam, I came to the Messenger of Allah and my name was not Abdullah bin Salam. The Messenger of Allah named me Abdullah bin Salam. Muhammad had grown up in Petra, and yet after 12 years of recitals, he had nothing to show for it following the satanic verses. He became even more of a laughingstock, a buffoon, who was mocked so incessantly 58 that he put his tail between his legs, grabbed a handful of misfits and malcontents, and he left his home in shame. Under the circumstances, there would have been no chance that he would have received a hero's welcome in the urbane and literate, primarily Jewish, city of Yathrib. These are myths to make other myths seem palatable. Moving on to the second fable, Salman al-Farisi, called either Salman the Persian or Abu Abdullah, would have been a Trinitarian religiously. He was raised a Zoroastrian. He was supposedly attracted to Christianity but converted to Islam in Yathrib. He is credited with saving Muhammad and his gang during the Battle of the Trench when he came up with the idea of slowing the siege by digging in the sand to keep Muhammad's kin at bay. This then led to the annihilation of every Jew in Yathrib. Therefore, since the claims presented in Quran 17.106-109 are not only backdated and fictitious, but contrary to the Quran's own admission of wholesale disapproval up to this point, this is nothing more than a desperate ploy for credibility. And it could not come at a worse time. Quran 17.110, say, call him Allah or call him Rahman, whatever the name you call him, all of his names are beautiful. Do not say your prayers too loudly or in too low a voice, but follow in a middle course, sick. Call him Rahman. Whatever the name you call him. All of his names. Thank you, Allah, or Ar-Rahman, or whatever your name might be, for confirming the obvious. Neither Allah nor Ar-Rahman are words that mean God, they are names of gods. The Arabic word for God is Ilah, and it's used throughout the Quran. Further, the name and title of the first Quranic deity was Rabbi Lord. The second was Rahman. The third was Ar-Rahim. Allah who came in fourth, along with Al-Lat, Manat, and Al-Azza. 59 It is obvious that Muhammad learned about the God of the Arab converts to Judaism among the Sabaeans in Yemen. Maslama and Zayd, both contemporaries of Muhammad, proclaimed the poetry that was purloined to compose the Quran's initial surahs. Maslama, like Tubi'a Karina, could have been Muhammad's twin. He taught a strict moral code that prohibited drinking and fornication. He required fasting and formal ritualistic prayers 3 times a day. Maslama believed in the day of resurrection and encouraged a Hajj. He preached in the same rhymed prose of Muhammad's Quran and even called himself the messenger of God, saying his revelations came from Ar-Rahman. And whatever Maslama missed, Zayd covered. His poetic lines made their way into the Quran verbatim. While Muslims disparaged Maslama, calling him the arch-liar and false prophet, his style and substance were indistinguishable from Muhammad's. The foremost American Islamic academician, F.E. Peters, said, it is difficult to imagine that Maslama borrowed Ar-Rahman from Muhammad. It is easier to assume that Ar-Rahman had a genuine and long-standing cult in Yemen, a cult to which Muhammad may have been drawn. A war was ultimately waged over who was the better prophet. During the War of Compulsion, the Battle of Aqaba was fought between Muslims and Maslama's forces. Ar-Rahman's troops won the first encounter, but in the second attack, Muslims divided their army to see who could die the most valiantly. 700 of Muhammad's companions died that day, as did much of the Quran. The surahs were stored only in the memories of warriors. The most faithful were now dead and dying in a grove of old trees that became known as the Garden of Death. While the Quran suffered a serious blow, Allah's army carried the day, slaughtering 7,000 Arabs. With their deaths, all opposition to Islam was 60 suppressed in Arabia. Ar-Rahman was forgotten. And so it would be, forevermore. Before we turn the page on the great integration of the Quranic Trinity, it is important that we invalidate the popular Islamic myth that Moses predicted Muhammad's arrival. In context, this is what Yahowah's prophet pronounced. Indeed, when, you come upon, you enter into, are led and return to, and are included within, the land which, for the benefit of the relationship, Asher, Yahowah, your God, Yahowah, Elohim, Ada, is giving, Nathan, is bestowing and entrusting, to you, La, Ada, you should not accept, learn, teach, or imitate, Lo, Lamed, you should not instruct, be trained in, or become accustomed to, such that you act upon and engage in, La, Asa, you affect, attend to, commit. Profit from, bring about, ordain, institute, or perform any semblance, any derivative or similitude, of the disgusting religious rites and political practices, toiba, abhorrent ceremonies, detestable idolatrous mythologies, repulsive and loathsome rituals, abominable festivals, of the Gentiles, hahem, of the people from different races, customs, and places. Dabrim/word/Deuteronomy 18 verse 9. It makes no difference if the toiba, disgusting religion, is of Egyptian origin, Babylonian, Assyrian, Greek, or Roman. The names of the sun, moon, and star gods changed, but little else. Roman Catholicism, Rabbinic Judaism, and Muhammad's Islam were all based upon variations of the same formula, although the come lately was clearly worse than its predecessors. They deceived by counterfeiting the truth, by misappropriating and misconstruing the things of Yahowah, albeit Islam took this approach to the extreme. Collectively and individually, they lead mankind away from Yahowah and to separation 61 in death. Their every rite, ritual, and object of worship is an abomination, detestable, abhorrent, and repulsive. Continuing to expound upon the worst of human behavior, Yahowah added, There shall not be found, lo, matzah, there shall not be encountered, detected, or discovered, among you, Ada, one causing his son or daughter to pass over and perish, Abar ben hu, Wabath hu, a person having their child cross over and cease to exist, sacrificed, in a fire, Esh, someone predicting the future based upon pagan religious notions, Kasem, believing false prophets, responding to conspiratorial suggestions, forming opinions based upon religious concepts. Consulting with the dead and trusting saints, a person who obscures the truth and believes in spiritualism, Anan, a person who makes decisions based upon appearances or astrology, acts covertly, believes in casting spells, and clouding over, or one who tempts and charms others, Nachash, one who offers deceptive precepts and false prognostications, an enchanter who cannot prove their position using evidence or reason, someone who is serpentine and toxic. An individual who entices and seduces people to worship and pray. Kashaf, the corrupting influence, deceptive religious rites, rituals, and beliefs, Dabram 18:10, one who joins in and binds together by forming political or religious alliances, Cheber, one who charms others into leaguing together and forming a religion, one who fascinates with eloquence, creating a spellbinding fellowship, one who is obsessed with ghosts, makes requests of saints, or speaks on behalf of dead souls, Shail, OWB, someone who prefers and seeks advice on being spiritual, who asks about the deceased, an obsession with wizards, or ancestor worship, a con man who beguiles in association with demonic spirits, Yidoni, a schemer who influences based upon his personal 62 knowledge of and relationship with evil spirits, one overly familiar with agony and anguish, intimately acquainted with demons and death, or one who causes the premature death of others in association with a destructive plague, Wadarash el Halmuth. One who resorts to killing, hellish tortures, wanton destruction, and body counts, insisting that those who oppose them are destroyed and die. Dabram 18:11. For indeed, all who engage in and act upon, Asa, these things, are an abomination, considered abhorrent and detestable, Toiba, are seen as repulsive, viewed as idolatrous and disgusting, to Yahowah. And so as a consequence of this repulsive religious excrement, Wabia Galo Toiba on account of this abhorrent political dung, because of their detestable feces, for the express reason of this abominable bullshit, and as a result of this filthy idolatrous crap, Yahowah, our Eloah God as directed in his Tawrah teaching regarding his High existence and our Shalom WM restoration, your God, Elohim Ada, will drive them out, dispossess them, and destroy them. Yerash Ethem, he will impoverish them by taking everything away, lands and possessions, from your presence, Min Pana Ada, from appearing around you. Dabram/word/Deuteronomy 18 verse 12. While there are hints of politics, this list of abominations is otherwise entirely religious, and most of it directed at condemning Islam. Therefore, by way of his introduction and conclusion, we have yet another affirmation that Yahowah abhors what Muhammad has led so many people to believe. Islam's very existence is predicated upon misappropriating and misconstruing God's testimony. 63 Yahowah is opposed to human sacrifice and, thus, suicide bombers. He is opposed to appeasing ungods like the Lord, Ar-Rahman, and Allah. He does not condone misleading children, religious prophets, dishonesty, spiritualism, and anything that is in conflict with evidence and reason, thereby sending a whirling dervish over Islam. He loathes those who encourage prayer and worship as well as anyone who forms religious and political alliances. Islam's devotion to martyrs is an abomination to God. Yahowah abhors those who abuse his people, especially when they are speaking for the Lord or the curse of Allah. He is revolted by these things because they are murderous, depriving Jews, Christians, and Muslims of their freedom, their lives, and of knowing him. Misappropriating a fear of death to scare the unthinking into being religious and pretending to speak on behalf of the departed is the stick-and-carrot approach of religion, particularly Islam. For most of human history, any opposition to religious authority led to a quick and torturous demise. Muhammad is shown throughout the hadith practicing magic and dealing with spells, but it was his Cheber eloquence that made his message so lethal. I offer this twist on Muhammad's favorite occupation as a confession. Bukhari, v9b 87 and 127, the Prophet said, I have been given the keys of eloquent speech and given victory with terror. He allegedly spoke these words during his final terrorist raid as he looted Christians at the periphery of the Byzantine Empire for the first time. If we want to be included in Yahowah's eternal covenant family, we must allow him to perfect us. And for this to occur, we must observe Pesach and Matzah leading to Bikurim and Shabuah. You can actually become completely and continually perfected by being consistently right. 64, Tamim Haya, you will exist as acceptable when you are correct, demonstrating integrity in being upright, with, I'm, Yahowah, an accurate presentation of the name of Eloah, God as guided by his Torah, instructions regarding his Haya, existence, your God, Elohim Ada. Dabram/Deuteronomy 18 verse 13. This statement is not only the lone remedy to resolve the stain and stigma, indeed, the stench of the religious Galo bullshit, but it also serves as a direct affirmation of the second of 5 conditions to participate in the covenant. After asking us to walk away from Babel, the confounding nature of religion and politics, God instructs us to walk to him and become perfected. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of the Berith covenant, of the YYV invitations, and, indeed, of the Torah teaching. They exist to make us acceptable, to perfect the imperfect, and to acquit those who are right about Yahowah. When our perceptions are correct about God, he opens heaven's door to welcome us into his home. Continuing to condemn Islam, and particularly the Philistinians occupying Israel and harassing God's people, Moses was inspired by Yahowah to reveal By comparison, indeed, these people from different races and places, Hagawim ha-el-leh, the Gentiles and those from other nations, who you shall dispossess and remove, Asher, Adayarash, who, for the benefit of the relationship, you will distance yourself from and disassociate with, they listen to, Ethem Shama El, false prophets who obscure the truth with myths, Anan, spellbinders, spiritualists, and politicians blowing smoke, those who venerate saints and ancestors, often concealing their actual motives while clouding the issue and acting covertly, and believe in antiquated religious notions and invalid opinion makers, wakasam, and respond to 65 cultural and conspiratorial suggestions, forming invalid conclusions based upon ancestry. But as for you, Ada, this is not the correct way, lo, Ken, this is not the right or truthful path, Yahowah, Yahowah, your God, Elohim Ada, has offered to you for you to approach, Nathan La Ada, has given, provided, and appointed for you to draw near, Cal perfect. Dabrim/word/Deuteronomy 18 verse 14. The Israelites were aware of the debilitating and dehumanizing nature of religion. They had spent the past 80 years as slaves in Mitzrayim, the crucibles of religious and political oppression. Having not learned their lesson, religion remains the dominant influence in the lives of some 40% of Jews worldwide. Worse, the curse of Allah came upon Yisrael on October 7, 2023, while Muslims and progressive Jews the world over celebrated the religious rape, plunder, kidnapping, torture, and mass murder of God's people. Yahowah is reminding us that he dislikes the religious and political so much that he won't tolerate them in his presence, near his people, or in his land. They will have no place in Yahowah's eternal family. So with Yahowah's preferences clearly articulated against religion, particularly Islam, we arrive at the statement misappropriated by both Christians and Muslims to validate their religions. A prophet, Nabi, a person who is inspired by God, who communicates and records the testimony of God, and who is accurate regarding past and future events, from among your midst, min karib Ada, out of your innermost nature, from your brethren, min ach Ada, related to you, similar to me, camo any, in accord with me and who can be compared to me, Yahowah, the transliteration of our Eloah, God as directed in his Torah, teaching regarding his Haya, existence. Your God, Elohim Ada, will raise up in 66 position to take a stand which establishes and affirms you, Qumla Ada, he will validate and confirm, elevating the status to encourage and restore you, enabling you to approach and rise. To him, I want you to actually and continually listen, Elhu Shama, it is my will that you genuinely hear him with ongoing implications over time. Dabrim/Deuteronomy 18 verse 15. This is consistent with everything, Ka-Kol, according to all, which, Asher, you requested of, Sha'al Min, Im, you asked for while questioning, Yahowah, your God, Elohim Ada, in Choreb, Ba Choreb, during the day of the assembly, Ba Yom HaKahal, in the time everyone in the community congregated together, when you said, La Amar, never again let me hear, Lo, Yasaf La Shama, no more, not even one additional time do I want to listen to, the voice, Kaul, the sound of Yahowah, a transliteration of Yahowah as instructed in his Torah, teaching regarding his Haya, existence, my God, Elohim Eni. Nor let me see and witness, while lo, Ra, nor be visibly shown, this intense fire, Eth-ha-esh-ha-gad al-hazoth, this massively powerful, brilliantly glowing flame of light, anymore, out, again, lest I die, while lo, muth, dot. Dabrim/Deuteronomy 18 verse 16. Therefore, Yahowah, said, Amar, that is actually better, and they have appropriately conveyed their preference, Yadab Asher Dabber, they have responded as expected under the circumstances, communicating what they want regarding the relationship and it is acceptable. Dabrim/Deuteronomy 18 verse 17. I will raise up and establish, I will set up and confirm, a prophet, Nabi, a man I can inspire to accurately convey past and future events, for them, Lahem, to approach them and be near them, from among their brothers, min karib Akihem, from the innermost part 67 of their brethren and relatives, similar to you, Kamo Ada, in accord with you. And I will put, Nathan, I will give, provide, and bestow, offering, my words, Dabrim Eni, my message and testimony, in his mouth, Ba Pehu, and he will convey to them, Dabr Elhem, he will speak to them and communicate, everything which, for the benefit of the relationship, Ethkol Asher, I instruct him, Sahu, I appoint and direct of him. Dabrim 18:18. And it shall come to be, Wahaya, that an individual who, Asher, that a person, who for the benefit of the relationship, will not listen, Lo, Shama, to my words, El Dabrim Eni, my testimony, which he shall declare, Asher Dabr, which he will share to show the way to the benefits of the relationship and to get the most enjoyment out of life, in my name, Ba Shem Eni, I, myself, will seek it of him and hold him accountable for it, requiring it of him, Anaki Darash Min Im. Who, I will hold him responsible after conducting an investigation. Dabrim/Deuteronomy 18 verse 19. This is among the most provocative and least appreciated declarations in the Torah. To set the scene, Yahowah had asked Moses to gather the children of Israel so that he could speak directly to them, the purpose of which was to affirm that everything Moses had been sharing with them had, indeed, come from God. From a human perspective, the meeting had been an unmitigated disaster. Rather than reassuring the Israelites, Yahowah had unintentionally intimidated them. The brilliance of his presence and the tenor of his voice were overwhelming, too much for these irascible people with a bad attitude to handle. It is likely, also, that they were concerned that God was going to peer into their minds and souls and recognize that they were not that far removed from their brethren who had conspired to craft 68 and worship the golden calf. Men have long preferred gods they conceive because they can speak for them and manipulate them to serve their most wretched cravings. This may sound shocking, but it is nevertheless true, most men and women want nothing to do with Yahowah. They prefer fake gods, who, by design, are similar to them and accepting of them. They rather like a God that they can influence with their prayers and deeds. Most men and women prefer them as puny and pathetic, as malleable and contradictory, as are they. A god befitting the people is easy enough to make. Humankind has devised millions of them. Get enough people to believe based upon the monumental edifices erected to them and the scriptures attributed to them, and a god is born. They grow in stature by building religions around them, by telling the skeptics that they are going to be tortured in hell and the compliant that they will be rewarded in heaven. The more popular they become, the more godly they appear. Throughout history, in every race and place, men and women have done this very thing, shaping their culture and lives around the gods they have fabricated, with the most prevalent being Jesus Christ and Allah. And where there is a false god, the real God is not welcome because he threatens to undermine the very essence of the religious enterprise. Nearly 3,500 years later, nothing has changed. On this day, the people pleaded with Moses to intervene, to silence the voice of God and remove his light. While that would normally be considered a giant stride back into Mitzrayim, even a return to Babel, it is what Yahowah had anticipated. It is the reason he asked Moses to engage with him to liberate his people. It is the reason God was revealing the Torah through this lone individual rather than to numerous messengers over time. 69 individuals are few and far between who listen to Yahowah and accept him on his terms. Fewer still engage, doing as God has instructed. Even over the past score of years, while there are many covenant members who work with me to publish and promote Yahowah's message, when it comes to the translations and insights, these books have been written as a collaborative effort between the 7 spirits of Yahowah and the Choder secondary branch and succor giving the old roots and stump new life, as was explained in Yashayah/Isaiah 11. This is consistent with the way Yahowah has engaged with man since these words were spoken 3,470 years ago. Whether it was Adam or Noach, Abraham or Jacob, Shamuel or Daud, Zechariah and then Malachi, or now with the Basar Herald, Yahowah has been consistent. With very rare exceptions, he has chosen 1 or 2 individuals with whom to engage and through whom to communicate with Yisrael. And he seldom, if ever, works alone. Yahowah does not want to intimidate us or have anyone worship him. He is an advocate of free will and wants nothing more than to develop a familial relationship. We approach our God through evidence and reason and by choice, not because he is so visible and loud that he cannot be denied. It is the reason we were created in the first place. This explains the covenant. In this particular prophecy, the predicted individual would be a Yisraelite and a prophet, of which there were some 30 from this point forward, with half of them leaving a written legacy scribed by their own hand. Of them, the 2 most prolific were Moses and Daud, the 2 mighty Zeroah. Shamuel, Yashayah, and Yirmiyah would also leave an indelible written legacy to explain the past and predict the future. Yahusha, Ben Nun, Haushah, Chabakuk, Yoel, Shalomo, Amatz, Zephaniah, Zechariah, and Malachi also left impressive 70 written reports. Each of these prophets is irrefutable and undeniable because they were inspired by God in such a way that everything they wrote proved to be accurate. This is the antithesis of Muhammad, Allah, and the Quran. Of Yahowah's Nabi, masculine singular, only one rises to the level of Moses and that is Daud David. Moses explained the Mikrei and Daud fulfilled them. Moses conveyed the Berith, and Daud embodied it. Upon his return, Yahowah will be arriving with his chosen Mashiach, Melech, Ra'ah, and Ben, his chosen one, Daud. And it is to the lyrics of his Mizmor Psalms and the prose of his Mashal Proverbs that God wants us to listen. This predicted individual cannot be Moses because he is speaking of another like him. It cannot be Jesus because, even if he existed, he wrote nothing for us to read so we cannot listen to him. And it cannot be Muhammad because he was not a prophet and he murdered and enslaved Jews rather than liberating and saving them. As for Yashayah, Yirmiyah, Zechariah, et al., while they were prophets, Yisraelites, and wrote prolifically, they were many, not one. Moreover, of these potential candidates, only 2 liberated and saved God's people, Moses and Daud. Yahowah revealing himself through individuals like Daud rather than to large gatherings of illiterate people throughout time is a far better approach. It is the best way for everyone, no matter when or where they were born, to know Yahowah, read his Torah, attend his Mikrei, and participate in his Berith. In this manner, we are all given direct access to God and are able to study the revelations of his prophets whenever we want. However, with availability comes responsibility. Because Yahowah has made his testimony accessible, and because he has proven that he has inspired his prophets, 71 God will require proof of it, at least among those who wish to live with him. Without knowing what Yahowah revealed, we cannot be right about him, and unless we are correct, there is no life beyond the one we are living. By saying that the Nabi will come from your midst, and from your brethren, we are assured that he is a Yisraelite, a descendant of Jacob. And because Moses said, "You're not my," in this discussion regarding the Lo'i, the promised prophet would be of another tribe. After already announcing that he will be a Nabi, engaged in another Yatzah, by indicating that he would be similar to me, Moses was revealing that he would be supremely intelligent, a great writer and orator, an outstanding leader and liberator, someone who was chosen and equipped by Yahowah to shepherd his flock. Apart from Moses, there was only one other such man, Daud. Muhammad was disqualified on all accounts. We would be wise to listen to Yahusha, Ben Nun, to Shamuel and Yashayah, to Yirmiyah, and Haushah, as we are to Daud, but, while their messages are compatible, as individuals they are not comparable. Daud's life and lyrics go well beyond providing a prophetic narrative regarding the future of Yisrael because he is Yisrael and the living embodiment of the covenant. He is the Son of God. He is the shepherd we are afforded the opportunity to follow into the promised land. He is our king, once there. Without Moses, Yisrael would have become extinct in Mitzrayim. Without Daud, they would have been overcome by their enemies 3,000 years ago. And if not for his return to fulfill Yom Kippurim, Yisrael would be obliterated by Muslims. Daud is our guide, our mentor, our counselor, and our brother, our Messiah, shepherd, and king. His words are more prolific than any other. And Dowd is Yahowah's 72 answer to the people's problem, their preference to listen to a man speak of God rather than directly from God. As the man Yahowah chose and anointed to inspire and enlighten his people, Dowd is Yahowah's retort to Yisrael's response. God learned from this experience and made a promise that he would interact with and address the wayward nation through the best of them. Yahowah brought Dowd out of obscurity, raised him above all Yisrael, and established him as the Mashiach, Arayah, Ben, and Melech as well as his Nabi. God placed his words in his mouth, evidence of which we find throughout the Mizmor and Mashal as he sang them to us. God's son followed in his father's footsteps, doing as Yahowah instructed. And because of this, God is expecting us to know what he wrote for us to read. His words, after all, define the relationship Yahowah wants to achieve with those who seek to be part of his covenant family. We are wise to recognize and accept Dowd's unique position in the heart of Yahowah's story. The man who arose to enlighten us in year 3000 Yah, opened the door to life in year 4000 Yah, and he will be returning in year 6000 Yah as our king. He is our shepherd and has served as the lamb. Those who do not recognize him will not be recognized or accepted by Yahowah. And that is the moral of this story. It is why Yada Yahowah leads through observations to coming home where Dowd's Mashal and Mizmor are king. It is at this point in Moses' pronouncement that he declared false prophets like Muhammad deadly. With absolute certainty, a.k.a. emphasizing the point and to establish a contrast, the person who proclaims a message on behalf of a deity, ha-nabi, a prophet, who deliberately oversteps their bounds and speaks arrogantly and presumptuously, defiantly concocting a rebellious scheme, Asher Zyd, who has an 73 inflated sense of self-worth, insolently demonstrating self-reliance while being insubordinate, who conceitedly pretends to know, insults others and is disrespectful, displaying pride in the pursuit of personal recognition and acclaim while despising rivals, who intentionally rebels against that which is established and is prone to rage, who seethes with anger and is repeatedly furious, overbearing and rude while insolently promoting their plans, for the express purpose of conveying words, la dabber, for the intent of communicating a message, stating it verbally or in writing, under my reputation and designation, ba shem any, in my renown and name, which, Asher, eth. Implying access and relationship. I have not expressly appointed, taught, authorized, nor directed him, lo, Sahu, I have not provided the instruction to him, I have not assigned, constituted, decreed, prescribed, or ordained this for him, deliberately and demonstrably making him my understudy and sending him out as my messenger, to, la, convey, dabber, to speak and communicate, or, wa, pu, Asher, speaks, dabber, conveys a message, in the name, ba shem, in the designation or reputation, of other and additional. Aker, different and subsequent, gods, Elohim, then, Wa, that prophet, Ha-Nabi, Hahu, that individual who proclaims a message on behalf of that presumed deity, is actually deadly, Muth, he is literally devoid of life and is genuinely destructive, he is murderous, and while he will die, his death will not be permanent, Cal perfect, the meaning is not nuanced or hypothetical, and while his death will not be the end of his existence, there will be a cure for his plague. Dabarim. Deuteronomy 18 verse 20. It is off to Sheol for Muhammad and Allah. 74 Returning to Petra, which has been recast as Mecca, during the late 5th century, we discovered that the Qusayy tribe had ousted the Jurhum clan. As a result, Luhay came to establish the rights and privileges of the Qusayy. But he became ill, we are told by Muslim scholar Ibn al-Kalbi, in his Book of Idols. Luhay went to a hot spring in Syria to be cured. During his stay he noticed that the locals worshipped idols. What are these things, he asked. To which they replied, we pray to them for rain and for victory over enemies. Luhay asked the Syrians for some of their stones. They agreed and he took them back to Mecca where he erected them around the Qusayy. It would have been an easy 4 or 5 day walk of some 100 miles along the banks of the Jordan and on well-established Roman roads to Syria from Petra, and about twice that far to Damascus. However, it would have been a nearly impossible journey of over 600 scorching miles without water or roads to Mecca, even if it existed at the time. Regardless of location, Luhay's fellow tribesmen played along. Everyone got into the mode of worshipping stones, enshrining them, prostrating themselves in prayer, and circumambulating them. Ibn al-Kalbi tells us, the Arabs were accustomed to offering sacrifices before these idols and stones. Nevertheless, they were aware of the excellence and superiority of the Qusayy to which they went on pilgrimage. Since Petra had been a well-established site for religious pilgrimages with all of its unique and grand temples carved out of the rose sandstone and built of rocks, and was replete with ample water, food, and shelter, and was located along major roadways at the intersection of the civilized world, and Mecca was so distant, isolated, austere, and puny it was never mentioned prior to the 8th century, it's rather obvious where the Qusayy was located. Muhammad, however, did not speak so kindly of Luhay, the first Arab associated with the Qusayy. He said, 75 is shock 35, I saw Luhay dragging his intestines in hell. I asked him about those who lived between his time and my time and he said that they had all perished. Muhammad went on to protest. Is shock 35, this led the Meccans to worship stones. Thus generations passed and they forgot their primitive faith and adopted another religion, replacing that of Abraham and Ishmael. They prayed to idols and adopted the same errors as the peoples before them. Yet they held fast to the Qusayy and circumambulated it, the greater and lesser pilgrimage, the standing place, and the cry, at your service, O Allah, at your service. That was pathetic, even by Muhammad's standards. As archaeologists have proven, Mecca didn't exist as anything more than a collection of mud huts in a dry wadi before the Qusayy was moved and the Islamic legends were constructed around it. If the Arabs, during the prior generations, had forgotten their primitive faith and adopted that which is associated with Abraham, then they would have converted to Judaism as we have discovered. But that means that there wouldn't have been any polytheists to burn in hell. And if they followed Abraham, they would have disavowed idols as he had done. Further, the way of Abraham cannot be erroneous if the Quran is to be believed, since Allah claims it as his own. Moreover, there is no Qusayy in Abraham's story, nor a pilgrimage, nor a pretend God named Allah. Nonetheless, we have arrived at the crux of the matter. Muslims reading these words will recognize that the rituals just depicted form the very heart of Islam. Yet Muhammad, Islam's founder, conceived none of these religious rites by his own admission. If Muslims are to believe Muhammad, they must acknowledge that every Islamic doctrine and ritual not only existed before the Quran, Muhammad, or even the first Muslim, while also admitting that they have been called idolatrous and errant. It's not often that the founder of a religion is so destructive to his faith. 76 As Ishaq has correctly explained, Islam was practiced before the Islamic non-prophet was born or his ungod transitioned from Rahman to Allah. And while that's a problem for Islam, it gets worse in context. The practitioners were pagans, and the rites were related to a religious scam, a money-making scheme. That's why, according to Muhammad, they were all damned to drag their intestines through hell. Well played, Muhammad. Over these next pages, we will be entertained with tall tales about how Muhammad's great-great-great-grandfather Qusayy capitalized on the work Luhay had done when he carried idols and stones back to the non-existent Meccan shrine. Qusayy, a pagan, an opportunist, and a very creative, albeit twisted fellow, invented every important Islamic ritual and doctrine to gain power and money. Qusayy invented the religious scam Muhammad dusted off and called Islam. All we know about Qusayy and the early Meccans comes from the Hadith, and that's what it says. This, then, begs the question, why would Muhammad reveal something so damaging to Islam? The answer is either that the non-prophet, like his ungod, lacked creativity and had to steal everything from someone else. This has been the story of the Quran from the beginning. Satan has always been a clever counterfeiter but a lousy inventor. The other option is that the easiest way to promote a new religion is to base it on an old religion. By providing accepted rites and rituals with new names, the people are already accustomed to them. This is the basis of Christianity and Judaism, so the trail was blazed long before Muhammad. In this case, the Quran and Hadith make it clear that every Islamic rite was already being practiced by the pagans of Muhammad's day, so those who composed these Hadith in the 8th and 9th centuries in Iraq were compelled 77 to provide a reason. The Quran makes no effort to explain the nature of prostration or the Hajj, so the Sunnah had to be predicated upon improvised Hadith. Moreover, for the non-prophet and ungod to be perceived as credible, they had to be associated with the Torah, and their favored point of entry was through Abraham. So they contrived this entire scheme and tied it to the mythology of the Qusayy Incorporated. Therefore, unless we know who founded it and nurtured the enterprise during its entrepreneurial phase, we'd be lost trying to understand who is doing what to whom, or why. But as with all things Islam, it's a two-edged sword. One side cuts through the fog of ignorance, the other kills the ignorant. Ishaq, 38 The Quraysh had a well in the Qusayy and an idol called Hubal. They adopted Asaf and Na'ilah by Zamzam, sacrificing beside them. They were a man and woman of the Jurhum tribe, Asaf ibn Bagi and Na'ilah bint Dik, who were guilty of sexual relations in the Qusayy, and so Allah transformed them into two stones. Aisha said, "We always heard that Asaf and Na'ilah copulated in the Qusayy, so Allah transformed them into stones." Muslims are on the losing side of this pronouncement as well. If Allah turned people into stone idols, he'd be an idolater himself. Further, the actual God isn't the least bit bothered by normal sexuality. His only issues are Muhammad and Muslim peculiarities, rape, pedophilia, incest, cross-dressing, and bestiality. There is only one pre-Islamic inscription regarding Hubal, and it is Nabatean. Hubal, which, as a compound of Hu, Aramaic for spirit, and Baal, and thus Baal Lord, was the spirit of the Lord. In the Nabatean inscription, Hubal was named along with Dushra, the lord of the mountain, and the Nabatean goddess, Manet. Dushra was the chief deity of the Nabateans, for whom a royal house, Qusayy 78 say Qusayy, was constructed in Petra. Manet was the goddess of fate and destinies, and thus Islam, which is predicated upon predestination. Further, Hubal the spirit of the Lord was the son of Al-Lat, the great goddess, and thus a Petran moon god and part of the Nabatean trinity. Also, the human imagery of Hubal is a perfect match for Dushra, who was carved in the shape of a man throughout Petra. And by the way, the Nabateans believed in bodily resurrection and entering lavish garden paradises with opulent feasts, just as would be the case with Islam. They even believed that the stones representing their gods fell from heaven. And they were known to lead processional walks around their places of worship, moving from site to site, with the path being delineated with betyls, stone blocks demarking the way, as is the case with Islamic rituals to this day. This is indicting because the three goddesses of Satanic verse infamy in the Quran were depicted as Allah's daughters in Nabatean inscriptions, while others show them as Allah's wives. And in the Nabatean religion, Al-Azza, meaning most great or Akbar, was venerated by the Quraysh, Muhammad's tribe. This comes to us by way of Jonathan Porter Berkey in his The Formation of Islam, Religion and Society in the Near East, and Cambridge University Press, Neil Robinson and Islam, A Concise Introduction, by F. E. Peters and his Muhammad and the Origins of Islam by SUNY Press, Daniel Peterson and Muhammad, Prophet of God, Aaron Hughes by Eerdmans Publishing, The Idea of Idolatry and the Emergence of Islam from Polemic to History, by Columbia University Press, and by Paula Correnti in Redefining Dionysus by Walter Grutter, et al., 2013. Ibn Ishaq Sirah suggests that Luhay's Quzas eventually permitted Kinana's Quraysh to return to the Qusayy. The Quraysh, Muslims would have us believe, are direct descendants of Abraham through Ishmael. F.E. 79 Peters in his book, Muhammad and the Origins of Islam, explains, the tribal eponym Kinana stands for 15 generations after Ishmael in the line of direct descent, and Qusayy, the chief actor in what follows, is 8 generations after Kinana. Thus, according to Islamic reckoning, Ishmael's descendants returned to their father's town some 7 centuries after he and Abraham built the Qusayy in Mecca. In the meantime, the Ishmaelites, now called the Quraysh, had generally lived dispersed in scattered settlements throughout the neighborhood. Peters is brilliant and his research is impeccable, but this is nonsense. It's not his fault, mind you, but the Muslim sources themselves. They had no idea who the Quraysh were or from whence they had come, other than they were prominent in Petra. But in a desperate grope for legitimacy, they were ever prone to make believe. Abraham's confirmation of the Berith covenant with his son, Yitzhak, occurred on Mount Moriah in what would become Jerusalem in 1968 BCE. 7 centuries would place us in the 13th century BCE, not the 5th century CE. The Ishmaelites are traced from Shur in the northern Sinai, east toward Assyria and Havilah, which would have placed them well north of Arabia and along the great rivers, but that is the least of their problems. Islam's justification for promoting Allah and his Qusayy is all derived from having had it built by Abraham, the father of the covenant who left Babylon and migrated along the rivers with Yahowah into Israel. It is also predicated upon having Muhammad being a direct descendant of his poorly conceived son Ishmael. Neither is true. For according to Islam's own traditions, the Qusayy was first ennobled by some stones luhe hauled from a Syrian hot spring. The lure of a miracle cure begot a religion. And in Petra, which would have been within walking distance from Beersheba, would not come to exist for 13 centuries after Abraham's death. And 80 the earliest that a Qusayy could have been seen as a meaningful shrine among the many grand edifices of Petra's past, would have been in the 5th century CE. Moreover, the hadith claimed that Muhammad was born in Yathrib, which would have made him Jewish. Ibn Ishaq's Sirah biography begins with a section entitled, Muhammad's Pure Descent from Adam. Ishaq, 3, this is the book of the biography of the Apostle of Allah. Muhammad was the son of Abdullah, bin Abdul Muttalib, bin Hashim, bin Abd Manaf, bin Qusayy, and so on for 13 generations to Kinana. Although less credible, it is reminiscent of Matthew's and Luke's genealogies designed to link the mythical Jesus with David. Ishaq lists another 15 generations back to Abraham and Ishmael. The accounting from Abraham to Noah and ultimately to Adam came directly out of Genesis and is of little value in that every human equipped with a neshama conscience is a descendant of Adam by way of Noach. However, I'd like to apply some simple math to the Islamic genealogy to show that the first Muslims were clueless. Qusayy, the alleged founder of the scam that became Islam, preceded Muhammad by approximately 80 years. And Luhay, the alleged founder of the Qusayy, preceded Qusayy by the same length of time. Similarly, Kinana could not have been more than 100 years removed from Luhay, which puts us in the early part of the 4th century CE, which would have been impossible because Petra was in its prime at that time and there was no Qusayy. This known, to make Muhammad's genealogy pure, 15 generations would have to span over 2,300 years. Put another way, the Jews who maintained precise written records in their temple in anticipation of the Messiah, listed 41 generations from Abraham to the early 1st century CE. Another 15 would be required to arrive at Kinana's time for a total of 56, nearly 4 times the 81 Islamic number. While this may seem trivial in comparison to the sun setting in a muddy spring surrounded by extraterrestrials, it's not. Islam is completely dependent upon establishing a link between Abraham and the pagan rites practiced around the Qusayy. If their chronologies are errant by a factor of 400%, it does not bode well for the rest of their theory. Abraham went to Mount Moriah with Isaac in 1968 BCE and Petra would not be founded by the Nabateans until sometime after 400 BCE. The first mention of Mecca isn't until 800 CE, a gap of between 16 and 28 centuries. Unless Abraham was a time traveler, he could not have built anything in either place. The earliest Islamic mention of Mecca with even a modicum of veracity pertains to the Jurhum. They were alleged to have camped periodically in the valley that later became Mecca, but there is no tangible evidence of this, making it folklore. Tabari, the earliest Muslim historian, would have us believe that the Jurhum practiced pagan rites identical to current Islamic rituals in the 5th and 6th centuries CE. Muslims are out on a 2,800-year-old limb. Ishmael was born in 1992 BCE. And there is no tangible evidence to connect the dots between the banished character in either Petra or Mecca, much less with Muhammad and the Qusayy. 28 centuries of historical silence is a very long time, especially for an illiterate people. And even then, Muslims must deal with what Yahowah predicted regarding the descendants of Ishmael. He shall be, Wahu, Haya, he shall actually come to continually exist, Kalim perfect, as a wild ass, pair, as a donkey which breeds prolifically, of a man, Adam. His hand, Yadhu, his influence, will be against everyone, Ba ha kol, and everyone's hand, Wayad kol, against him, Bahu. Even in opposition to the 82 presents, Wa al-Pana, of all of his brothers, Kol, Achu, all of whom act like woeful howling animals, he will live and remain, Shakan, he will abide, never actually changing. Bears YTH/Genesis 16 verse 12. By contrast, it was in this muddle of ignorance that Qusayy was about to be the founder of the family business and establish himself as Muhammad's mentor. Islam's unofficial patriarch was born at the end of the 5th century CE, 100 years after the collapse of Petra. Tabari 6:20 Qusayy asked his mother which tribe he came from. She answered, "You are the son of Kilab ibn Murrah ibn Kabi ibn Luhay ibn Kalib ibn Fir ibn Malik ibn al-Najr ibn Kinana al-Qurashi." To which he said, "Good grief. I think I'll change my name." Just kidding. Actually, Tabari reports. Tabari 6:20 Your tribe lives in Mecca by the Qusayy. This revelation awoke in Qusayy a strong desire to return to Mecca and join his people, the Quraysh. While Petra was open for business, Mecca was centuries away from being a prize, though. There would have been no permanent homes, and perhaps a few tents. Flash floods would have been a menace in the wadi, and the summer heat was and remains unbearable, as there were no trees or shade. No one lived in Mecca. Nevertheless, the people who can't remember what Muhammad and Allah said, claim that this mom told her son. Tabari 6:20 Wait for a sacred month and go with the pilgrimage. Qusay waited until the sacred month arrived and the pilgrim set out. When he reached Mecca and had completed the pilgrimage, he remained there. One of the 5 pillars of Islam is to complete the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca in the sacred month. This hadith proves that the rite was idolatrous 5 generations before Muhammad said it was Islamic. Even Muhammad's names for the pilgrimages, Hajj and Umrah, were borrowed from his pagan past. 83 Qusay, arriving at either the remaining ruins of Petra or an uninhabited wadi in what would become Mecca, established the model Muhammad would ultimately require Muslims to follow. But that's not all he did to inspire Islam's future non-prophet. Tabari quotes. Ishaq, 48, at the time Qusay was in charge of the Qa'ibah and ruled in Mecca. Qusay asked him for the hand of his daughter Hubba in marriage. It is claimed that she was the wealthiest and best-connected woman in town, which wouldn't be saying much in one place and nothing in the other. 5 generations later, Muhammad, who was abandoned and penniless, married Khadija, the wealthiest woman in Petra. Family tradition. Settling in, the newlyweds made 4 babies, 2 of which were named after the local rock gods, underscoring the fraudulent nature of Muhammad's religious invention. Ishaq, 49, Hubba bore him Abd al-Dar, Abd Manaf, Abd al-Uzza and Abd. His progeny increased, his wealth multiplied, and he became greatly honored. Qusay showed he was an idolater when he named his kids after the rock idols of Petra and the Nabateans. Yet he performed a pilgrimage in a holy month. He moved in with the king, the custodian of the Qa'ibah, and married his daughter. They named their first kid slave to the house, the most important thing in their lives, their source of wealth and power. Then they honored their gods by naming their next 2 children after them. And while it's interesting that Allah didn't even get an honorable mention, that's not the biggest problem. These passages confirm that the Qa'ibah was a pagan shrine and that at best, Allah was just one of many gods. The veneration of the house of idols shows that it was unconnected to any monotheistic religion, Islam included. A hadith gives us a glimpse of what was to come. 84 Ishaq, 49, Qusay thought he had a better right to the Qa'ibah and to rule over Mecca than the Khuza'a since the Quraysh were the most noble and pure descendants of Ishmael. The motivation for Islam can be condensed into a similar sentence. Muhammad thought he had a better right to the Qa'ibah and to rule over it than his family. With this in mind, everything associated with Islam's formation will make sense. The sages who crafted this tradition in Baghdad a dozen generations after Qusay's death must have thought their audience would remain as ignorant as their religious teachings were preposterous. After all, in an illiterate society, how would Qusay know that he was a more direct descendant of Ishmael than any other Arab? Ishmael had been sandals up for 2,500 years. Without copious and exacting written records, genealogies are impossible to establish after a handful of generations. Arabic as a written language had yet to be invented, and there were at least 60 generations separating these men. Also, how could they purport to know what Qusay thought? There were no written accounts to connect him and his discussions to when these hadith were written 4 centuries later. Since this scenario is impossible, the only reason Muslim sages felt compelled to legitimize Qusay's right to the Qa'ibah and rule over Mecca was to justify his great-great-great-grandson's claim. There are written records connecting the Quraysh to Petra, but not to Mecca. Tabari 6:20 He called upon his fellow tribesmen, the Quraysh, to expel the Khuza'a and seize Mecca for themselves. They accepted his proposal and swore an oath of allegiance to him. While I'm disappointed that the world hasn't exposed the scam that became Islam, I am grateful that the Islamic scripture makes it so easy. Muhammad would do precisely the same thing. He called upon his raiders to conquer the 85 Quraysh and seized control of their town. They accepted his proposal and swore oaths of allegiance to him. While we will cover these pledges later, suffice it to say for now, like Qusay's oath, it was a call to arms. And as with Muhammad, his people were the enemy, and the target was the Qa'ibah. Tabari, relying on traditions collected by Ishaq, reports. Tabari 6:20 The Arabs, recognizing their religious duty, accompanied Qusay. Marching to the Qa'ibah they said, "We have better right to this than you." At that they opposed one another and began to fight. A fierce battle broke out, as a result of which, Qusay wrested from them the privileges which had been in their hands, thus denying them. Little did they know how fraught with portent these words would be. They haunt us to this day, just as was foretold 4,000 years ago. Before we leave the skirmish, I feel obliged to share the alternate, peaceful, version. Tabari 6:21 Qusay purchased the custodianship of the Qa'ibah for a skin full of wine and a lute. While this variant earns kudos for non-violence, it's hardly religious. Purchasing the shrine that stands at the center of Islamic life, their God's house, for things their religion outlaws, music and booze, is laughably ironic. It's also an example of conflicting truths. Proving that Islam has something for everybody, Ibn Ishaq serves up alternative 3. This one foreshadows Islamic terrorists today and their willingness to use biological agents. Ishaq, 52, I have heard, and Allah knows best, that the Khuza'a were seized by an outbreak of pustules which nearly wiped them out. They abandoned Mecca. Making sure he had all his bases covered, Ishaq provided a 4th alternative. This one was for the doves, those who would use the peace process to steal that which they covet. 86 Ishaq, 52, both sides called for peace and for the appointment of one of the Arabs to arbitrate between them on their differences. This was evidently the model Jimmy Carter used to win the Nobel Peace Prize. All the spoils went to the Muslims. The infidels traded their land and money and got nothing in return. Ishaq, 52, the verdict was that Qusay, red Arab Muslims, had a better claim to the Qa'ibah, red Temple Mount, and to rule Mecca, red Jerusalem, than the Khuza'a, red the Jews. All the injuries inflicted and blood shed by Qusayy, red, suicide bombers, or Arab armies, upon the Khuza'a, red, the Jews, were cancelled and disregarded, red, forgotten, excused, or justified, while all injuries inflicted by the Khuza'a, the Jews, upon the Quraysh, red, Muslim Arabs, should be compensated for by blood money. Read, Carter committed the United States to paying the Arabs who lost the Six-Day War $2 billion a year in perpetuity. He added that Qusayy should be given a free hand to control the Kaaba and Mecca. Nothing has changed. Diplomacy with Islamic tyrants remains equally unbalanced and equally futile. Today, Israel trades 3 convicted terrorists for 1 innocent Israeli woman or child kidnapped by Islamic terrorists. It is what it is like to deal with the devil. Whether Qusayy prevailed by force, bribe, the peace process, or pestilence, he gained control of the rock shrine that had been populated by the patriarch's great-great-grandfather, Luhay. Ibn Ishaq chronicled the momentous event as only a Muslim could. Ishaq, 52, thus Qusayy gained authority over the Kaaba and the lordship over the people of Mecca. He behaved like a king over his tribe, so they made him a king. Qusayy, having established the model for Muhammad, went on to build the family business. However, to be king, Muhammad would become a pagan. More on that later. 87 Ishaq, 53 Qusayy assumed control and kingship. He was obeyed. He held the keys to the shrine, being the doorkeeper of the Kaaba. He held the right to water the pilgrims from the well of Zamzam and to feed them. He presided at the assemblies and held the right to hand out the war banners. In his hands lay all the dignities of Mecca, all of which he took for himself. This is the essence of Islam. Muhammad would speak these same words upon his conquest of the ruins of Petra after perpetrating genocide in Yathrib. And before that, Muhammad followed his mentor's example in Yathrib when he expelled the first of 3 Jewish communities from their homes by force, rewarding his fellow Muslims by dividing their property between them. Ishaq, 53, he also divided the property in Mecca among his followers, settling every clan of the Quraysh in the dwelling places assigned to them. No issue regarding public affairs was decided, nor was any banner of war entrusted without Qusayy's permission. Some years later, Muhammad would use force to gain control over Yathrib, the ruins of Petra, the Kaaba, its god, its dwellings, its well, pilgrims, assemblies, and even the disposition of war banners. He behaved like a king, forcing his will on his tribe, and killing anyone who got in his way. While these hadiths prove that Muhammad wasn't the least bit inventive, he has to be given credit for recognizing a workable plan and executing it. The pagan Qusayy, a charlatan, nourished every important aspect of Islam generations before Muhammad was born. Moreover, he, like the Prophet, did it in pursuit of sex, power, and money. The tradition concludes with these haunting words, words that became prophetic. Tabari 6:24 and Ishaq, 53, Qusayy's authority among the Quraysh during his lifetime and after his death was like a religion which the people followed and which could not be infringed, they always acted in accordance with its laws. They regarded it as filled with good omens and recognized his superiority and nobility. He 88 took for himself the assembly house which led from it to the mosque, place of prostration, of the Kaaba. Muhammad would do the same in what had been a substantial, 30,000-person, Jewish farming community for almost 1,000 years. He took for himself an assembly house which led to the open-air mosque where Islamic affairs were decided. And like Qusayy, Muhammad took upon himself the honor of handing out war banners before each of the 75 terrorist raids he orchestrated. Tabari 6:24 and Ishaq, 53, when they were about to fight another tribe, banners were tied only in his house, where one of his own sons would hand them out. Ibn Ishaq recognized the troubling ramifications of what he had just revealed. If this were true, it meant that a heathen had founded the religious scam Muhammad shaped into Islam. He realized that Muhammad's reliance on the leading characters portrayed in the Torah to legitimize Islamic rituals and pillars was as feeble as it was preposterous. The 10 tests of Abraham were perverse philosophically, the fables of Nimrod were lunacy historically, and the pure descent from Ishmael was not feasible genealogically. With the Jewish connection in rubble, the hadith portrayal of Qusayy obliterated Arab and Meccan credibility. As such, Ishaq sought out an ally to corroborate his account, choosing the second caliph. Ishaq, 53, Umar confirmed the story of Qusayy and how he gained control of the Kaaba and the affairs of Mecca. The hadith is incriminating, unraveling the fabric of Islam. More than 100 years before the first Quranic revelation fell from Muhammad's lips, the pillars of Islam had been established by a pagan entrepreneur. The Kaaba was the center of a new idolatrous religion, a scam designed to enrich its lone custodian, a man who used religion for political and personal gain. With methods identical to Muhammad's, Qusayy took control through 89 jihad and political covenants. He was purported to have nobility and superiority as he established religious doctrine, he was a messenger to be obeyed. The prostration had been established, as had the mosque. The Hajj, down to the most minute rites, had been enshrined in the religious lore. There was even a holy month. All that was needed now was for a religious tax to be implemented and for Allah to be promoted from among the quarry of rock idols for the pillars to be complete. If these final ingredients manifest themselves before we leave the 5th century, Islam will be laid bare, naked to the world of reason. It is exposed as the scam of Qusayy, not the religion of Abraham, and most certainly not the revelation of Allah. Before we search the annals of Islamic pseudo-history for the final 2 pillars, let's ponder the perplexing place their scriptures have taken us. There is no chance these pagan doctrines could have been derived from Abraham. There is no way to pass such rites across the 24 centuries that separate the real Islamic patriarch, Qusayy, from the patriarch of the Jews. There are no writings, no carvings, no scrolls, no scriptures, no recorded histories, and no archaeology. There isn't even a hint of Mecca existing during this awesome void of time. And thus, there aren't any people through whom these religious duties could have been conveyed. As such, the pillars were established upon the rocky ground of a pagan religious scam. You are witnessing the birth of Islam. Muslims say it isn't so because if it were, their religion would be nothing more than regurgitated paganism, a twisted plot woven out of lies. They claim Abraham traveled 700 miles through the inhospitable desert on non-existent roads with a young child and slave and came to Mecca to build the Kaaba 2,700 years before the village existed, all to establish Islamic rites. But they omit how he could have survived the desert crossing with a maid and a 90 infant. They don't say why he would have left the promised land for a deserted valley in the middle of nowhere. Why, with a score of chapters devoted to Abraham's life in the Torah, did Yahowah fail to mention any of this? Because it didn't happen. Islam isn't the religion of Abraham or the brainchild of Muhammad. It is the religion of Qusayy. The rites and rituals, regulations and taxes described in the rest of this chapter will be familiar to Muslims reading these words. They practice all of them today. So that we might know how Muslims came to be hoodwinked into performing such mindless rites, while sacrificing their lives, let's consider how Qusayy developed his religion, the scam that became Islam. Having taken what didn't belong to him, Islam's founder, the patriarch Qusayy, was in business, the only viable business in the disintegrating relic of Petra. A man of politics, he became the prototype for what was to come. The largest structure in town, the meeting hall, served as his home and seat of power as it would for Muhammad. Qusayy connected it to the source of wealth, the Kaaba. He established regular prostration prayer services at the mosque and a plethora of religious rituals. The most disturbing, and enduring, was a butt-up sort of thing whereby the moon god was mooned. Tabari, like Ishaq, wanted his readers to know that he was not responsible for making up a story so damning to Islam. In the midst of his commentary, he inserted a hadith similar to Ishaq's. It's attributed to Kababab, the author of Al-Maksura. He said, I heard a man telling Umar bin al-Khattab, when he was caliph, this story of Qusayy and how he 91 gathered his own tribe together, expelled tribes from Mecca, and gained control of the Kaaba. Umar did not reject it or disavow it. That said, the hadith explains how Islamic ritual was established 5 generations before Muhammad. Ishaq, 49, the pilgrims gathered in Mecca, went out to the Mawqif, completed the Hajj and went to Mina. Nothing now remained of the ritual of the pilgrimage but the ceremony of dispersal from Mina. The Mawqif is now seen as the plain of Arafat, about 10 miles east of what became Mecca. Standing there between midday and sunset is an important part of the Islamic Hajj. This is followed by the Ifada, or dispersal. Ishaq, 49, on the day of the dispersal they went to stone the Jimar, and a man of the Sufa used to throw pebbles for the pilgrims, none throwing until he had thrown. This idolatrous rite would also have Islamic overtones. Muhammad, borrowing from his pagan past, instructed Muslims to observe the Jimar. Pebbles are thrown at 3 erections or heaps of stones. They are held to represent the devil. However, these stone pillars were not found in Mecca, but they do exist, and are prominent in Petra. Soon we find another Qusayy invention that Muhammad copied. Tabari 6:31 Qusayy instituted the lighting of the fire at Al-Muzdalifah when the Waqf took place so that those being driven away from Arafat could see it. This fire continued to be lit in this place throughout the Jahiliyyah. This fire was also lit in the time of the Messenger, and of Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman. Al-Muzdalifah is now portrayed between Arafat and Mina. Standing there is one of the Islamic Hajj rites, as is the fire. Bakr, Umar, and Uthman were the first 3 Islamic caliphs after Muhammad. Qusayy's ability to get the Meccans to perform these pagan rites served Muhammad magnificently. By the non-92 Prophet's day, they were all so ingrained among the Quraysh who migrated from and remained in Petra that the Quran simply assumed the continuance of the idolatrous ways without ever mentioning them. They became part of Islamic dogma by way of hadiths such as these. This next tradition demonstrates how dependent Muhammad was on Qusayy for the development of Allah's religious doctrine. Tabari 6:25 Qusayy's tribe held him in honor and high esteem. No one opposed his rule in any way. His commands were never disobeyed and nothing he did was opposed. As regards the Hajj, he confirmed the right of the Arabs to continue their previous customs. This is because he considered these to be a religious duty which he should not change. Qusayy established the cornerstone of Islamic rule, submit and obey. We will hear these words reverberate throughout the Quran. Devotion is a duty, prayer is an obligation, and rituals are compulsory. There is no choice. The hadith goes on to report this of the Quraysh clan from Petra, albeit placing them in Mecca with the help of revisionist history. Tabari 6:25 Qusayy had a house built in Mecca which was the house of assembly in which the Quraysh used to decide their affairs. Within days of Muhammad's arrival in Yathrib, we will see him order the construction of his house and assembly area. Then he will craft an agreement, making him the sole decision-maker over all affairs. All of this serves to prove that Islam was not the revelation of Allah to Muhammad but instead the verbatim implementation of the religion of Qusayy. Moving from entrepreneur to capitalist, this model opportunist soon found himself promoting a series of 93 economic fairs around the holy months. As godfather, he took a cut on each deal. Ishaq, 55, the Rifada was a tax which the Quraysh paid from their property to Qusayy at every festival. It, like the Kaaba concession, was an exclusive franchise, a cartel of sorts. Muhammad would rename the tax the zakat, but it was no different. Islam had its 4th pillar. Being the top dog in Kaabaville, however, was hardly worth bragging about. While his claim to fame was the rock shrine for rock gods, it was insignificant compared to Karnak, Athens, Delphi, Rome, or Ephesus, or Jerusalem in its glory. While Qusayy's scheme was inventive, it was a small-time affair. If it weren't for what Muhammad did with it, the religious scam of Qusayy wouldn't be worth the ink on this page. Acting as patriarch of his Khan, Qusayy made certain that only his direct descendants were eligible to participate in the family business. Even then, his relatives were forbidden until they were 40. This is why it's assumed Muhammad was a direct descendant and that he was 40 when he claimed the Kaaba for himself. While the geographic and meteorological conditions were deplorable in Mecca, and less so in Petra, the Khan was better than working, which is why Qusayy conceived it and why Muhammad coveted it. Profits accrued from providing hospitality to pilgrims, on fees, and from taxes. The family took a cut on merchandise sold during the Truce of the Gods fairs of Ramadan. And they charged pilgrims fees to feed and dust the idols they placed in the Kaaba. It was a scam worth coveting. With enough money, they could hire someone to fan away the flies. Dividing the spoils inequitably between his sons, Qusayy said, Ishaq, 55 Abd al-Dar, by Allah, I shall make you the equal of the others, even though they have been raised in dignity over you. No man of them shall enter the Kaaba until you have 94 opened it, no, war, banner shall be tied for the Quraysh to go to battle except by your hand, no man shall drink water in Mecca except that which you have provided, no man shall eat food in the pilgrimage season other than your food, and the Quraysh shall not decide their affairs anywhere but in your house. In other words, he gave him the family business, Islam. And he swore by the ultimate Islamic God. Allah has emerged and the 5 pillars are now complete. Muhammad would come to call himself the messenger of Allah, and he would usurp his authority to resolve a similar family dispute. Initially, these rights and privileges passed him by, going instead to another heir. Jealous, Muhammad said that Allah told him that they were really his. This incriminating hadith continues to expose Islam's pagan roots. Every last detail was incorporated into Islam. Tabari 6:25, then he gave Abd al-Dar the house in which the Quraysh always made their decisions, and gave him the office of being Kaaba's custodian, declaring war, presiding over the assembly, and collecting the rafada, a tax levied in every pilgrimage season by the Quraysh according to their wealth and handed over to Qusayy. It was imposed on the Quraysh by Qusayy, who said to them when he commanded them to pay it, Quraysh, you are neighbors of Allah, people of his Kaaba and people of the sacred precincts of the Haram. The pilgrims are guests of Allah and visitors to his house. They did so, and every year they levied a tax on their property and paid it to Qusayy, and he would use it for the pilgrims during the days of Mina. This institution of his became the state of affairs among the Quraysh during the whole of the Jahiliyyah, pre-Islamic period, up to the time Allah brought Islam, and then became a part of Islam, continuing to this day. Ishaq, 57, Allah's apostle said, whatever deal there was in the days of ignorance, Islam strengthens it. Put a fork in this thing and dial down the sunstroke. Islam has cooked its goose. The last of the Islamic pillars has been established and we are still scores of years from 95 the first Quranic revelation. The religious scam has been established right down to the smallest detail, and they even admit it. All Muhammad had to do was steal it. The Qusayy model had a single prophet. His God was now Allah. This was a match for Islam's first pillar. The prostration prayer was an obligatory duty and it was performed facing his Kaaba, the second pillar. The religious tax, or zakat, was instituted and collected in Allah's name, the third pillar. The Hajj pilgrimage was laid out and observed in all its ritualistic detail, the fourth pillar. And en route to Mecca, Qusayy observed the holy month of Ramadan and Tahannath fasting, the fifth pillar. But, as you shall see, the pillars of Islam were merely window dressing. The real foundation of the doctrine was submission, absolute obedience. Tabari 6:25, Qusayy's tribe held him in honor and high esteem. No one opposed his rule in any way, his commands were never disobeyed and nothing he did was ever opposed. Ishaq, 56, Qusayy was never contradicted nor was any measure of his overthrown. Religion was a veil. Tabari 6:24, his authority among the Quraysh during his lifetime and after his death was like a religion which the people followed, they always acted in accordance with it. That said, the means to submission was the sword. It established Islam. Muhammad would use Qusayy's war banners to initiate scores of terrorist raids. The resulting booty financed his religion and inspired his initial adherents. And as with Qusayy, the real motive was money. But theirs was not an honest endeavor. Their wealth was not created from the sweat of their brow, it was booty, looted from others. In fact, Muhammad's first rendition of Islam's pillars included a share of stolen property. Bukhari v1b2n 50, Apostle, order us to do some religious deeds that we may enter paradise. The Prophet asked them, do 96 you know what it means to believe in Allah alone? They replied, Allah and his Apostle know better. The Prophet said, it means, 1, to testify that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, and Muhammad is Allah's Apostle. 2, to perform prayers perfectly. 3, to pay the zakat obligatory tax. 4, to observe the Ramadan fast. 5, and to pay 1/5 of the booty taken in Allah's cause. Following Qusayy's lead, submission to Allah, or Islam, was defined as acknowledging Muhammad as the sole authority, bowing down, paying a tax, observing a pagan practice, and sharing the booty collected from terrorist raids. Under the tutelage of Islam's patriarch, the fading ruins of Petra were rejuvenated. An ignoble and ignominious pagan sand pit became a religious scam extraordinaire. The Kaaba Incorporated became a family business awaiting the polishing touches of one of the great promoters of all time, Qusayy's great-great-great-grandson, Muhammad. Within 100 years, a dilapidated rock pile and a silly religious scam would emerge as a tour de force. I'd like to pause for a moment and reflect upon the place to which the Quran and Hadith have brought us. In the creation accounts, we learn that Muhammad and Allah could not be trusted, that they were too dishonest and foolish to be prophet and God. They buried themselves when they presented hell so graphically and revealed that their heaven was a brothel. Their plagiarized and twisted stories recasting Adam, Noah, Abraham, and Lot as Muslim prophets tore asunder Islam's credibility, its very reason for being. The stories were contradictory, transparent, and irrational. The claims that the Quran confirmed the Torah and that Allah was Yahowah were preposterous, further indicting the doctrine. And now, we have a death blow. We have discovered that Islam's 5 pillars were conceived by Qusayy, not Muhammad, a pagan, not a Muslim. As a 97 result, Islam is dead. And the post-mortem is clear. Death was self-inflicted, it was suicide. While the case may not yet be the lay-down hand I promised in the prologue, the story of Islam's formation is still young. In the next 100 pages I will reveal a mountain of corroborating evidence from their scriptures. As is the case with man, Qusayy's wealth didn't buy him a reprieve from family squabbles or the Grim Reaper. Abd al-Dar failed to serve in the capacity for which he had been named. Abd al-Uzza and Abd grabbed the keys to the kingdom. They became the beneficiaries of the religious tax. No one, we are told, would be able to eat, drink, fight, worship, or decide any matter without their express written permission. Okay, verbal permission. They were illiterate. Each of Qusayy's sons considered himself more worthy than the others. Civil strife broke out between the Scented Ones and the Confederates. In a move that would have made Neville Chamberlain proud, peace was achieved by cutting the baby in half. Watering pilgrims and collecting taxes were controlled by Abd Manaf's clan. Qusayy access and waging war went to the family Abd al-Dar. This continued to be the state of affairs in Petra until an orphan boy with post-dated royal heritage coveted it all. The most interesting historical artifact from 6th century Arabia leads us directly to that orphan. It was the year of the elephant, which according to Muslim scribes was 570 CE. It is blazoned into the annals of Islamic history. Not correctly, mind you, since it transpired in 552 CE. The momentous event began with considerable fanfare. 98 Ishaq, for Rabi'a of Yemen saw a terrifying vision. So, he summoned every soothsayer, sorcerer, omenmonger, and astrologer in his kingdom. While there is overwhelming and irrefutable evidence provided throughout the Quran, Sunnah, and Hadith that Islam is satanic, having every soothsayer, sorcerer, omenmonger, and astrologer predict the arrival of a pure prophet to whom revelation will come is more blatant a connection than you'd think their scriptures would admit. But no, they really were this oblivious. These occult types said his dream predicted a satanic invasion from Africa, one ultimately thwarted by the arrival of a pure prophet. Guess who? Ishaq, for, by the serpent of the lava plains, I swear the Ethiopians shall attack. A pure prophet to whom revelation will come from on high will bring it to an end. The serpent of the lava professed, an apostle will bring truth and justice among men of religion and virtue. You would think that Satan would make an effort to be a little less transparent. A satanic endorsement is not going to earn the good housekeeping seal of approval. Nevertheless, the soothsayers went on to claim prophetically, Ishaq 5, it will be his intention to destroy the Jews living among him. In poetic verse they warned, in rage against 2 Jewish tribes who live in Yathrib who richly deserve the punishment of a fateful day. 1,453 years later, nothing has changed. Muslims continue to scream, kill the Jews from the river to the sea, on behalf of their demonic and bloodthirsty God. There can be little doubt considering these pronouncements that Satan was setting the stage for the arrival of the devil's advocate. Although, let's be honest in our reporting. These predictions by devilish types were not made in 570 CE, but were, instead, scribed posthumously circa 870 CE. 99 They were composed by Allah's slaves to make Muhammad's birth seem as magical as that of the mythical Jesus. And just as the baby god of Christianity would be welcomed by 3 magicians from Babylon, the little Mo would be greeted by a cadre of devils, too. However, since Satan realizes that the only real prophets are Jews, a harbinger of hell would have to be attributed to those who would be victimized by Islam. Ishaq 5, the approaching army will seek to destroy the temple in Mecca, for we know of no other temple in the land which Allah has chosen for himself. The rabbis told Rabi'a to do what the people of Mecca did, circumambulate the Kaaba, to venerate and honor it, to shave his head, and to bow down in humility in its sacred precincts. Recognizing the soundness of this advice, the king cut off their hands and feet, and continued on to Mecca. One can only assume that every literate writer in Iraq was previously engaged in adding to the Babylonian Talmud and that the deplorable state of the Quranic and Sunnah discourse was the result of dredging scribes from the bottom of the religious swamp. While it was, of course, reassuring to see a prophecy regarding an army that never marched seeking to destroy the non-existent rock pile of rock gods in the uninhabited burg of Mecca, why did this Allahite destroy his ungod's agenda before he was conceived? If Allah was going to be the God of the Torah, he would have to claim the temple in the land of Israel as his own. These Muslims, who were Muslims before Muhammad brought Islam to Arabs, is another head-scratcher. And yet, they were able to circumambulate without feet and write poetry without hands. They are said to have added a rather long poem to their sacred books, reciting from the Torah. A few of its lines are intriguing. They correctly defined the Kaaba for what it really was and for what Muhammad would ultimately do with it. 100 Ishaq 12, a house of ancient wealth in Mecca. Treasures I wanted to seize. Then they are said to have authored one of the Quran's most embarrassing lines, Dhul Karnan, Alexander the Great, before me was a Muslim. With knowledge true. He saw where the sun sinks from view in a pool of mud and fetid slime. Why wasn't there any ancient wealth found in the Kaaba in Petra or Mecca, should this be true? What did the sun do to deserve such abuse? The cadre of scribal scribblers from the bottom shelf elevated their game to suggest that the post-dated devilish endorsement was correct because, as predicted, an African army invaded Yemen. But it had nothing to do with Mecca. Sabaeans lived on both sides of the Gulf. The Ethiopians practiced both Christianity and Judaism, with the Christians empowered over the Falashas. On the Yemeni side, as a result of Tubi'a Karina's siege of Yathrib, Judaism prevailed over Christianity. Here's what Ibn Ishaq has to say about them. Ishaq 12, after building a church, Abraha, an Abyssinian viceroy, led his army north. While the non-Islamic records don't mention a place as insignificant as Mecca, the Muslim sages allege that Abraha wanted to conquer their booming metropolis with the intent of destroying the non-existent Qusayy. They claim the viceroy was bent on luring pre-Islamic Arabs away from idolatry and toward a new Christian cathedral. The very thought of it must have made the rocks of the Qusayy tremble. According to legend, Abraha arrived on the outskirts of town with an army. But what made him formidable was his ride. The viceroy was mounted on a mighty elephant. And thus far, although grossly misdated, and having nothing to do with Mecca, this part of the story is almost plausible. Abyssinia is today's Ethiopia, so its viceroy could well have been mounted upon the mightiest of land 101 mammals. What's not reasonable is that there isn't enough food or water to sustain an elephant in the Arabian desert, at least for the beast to be more of an asset than a liability. Details aside, the story gets wild at this point. Ishaq 26, Mahmud, the elephant, bowed down whenever it was asked to face Mecca. Then Allah rallied a flock of birds, each carrying a pea-like stone in its beak and in each claw. Everyone who was hit died. They were instantly dissolved, their flesh falling from their bones. Abraha's fingers fell off one by one. Naturally proud of his fantastical achievement with the genuflecting elephant and punitive peas, Allah recounted his stirring victory in the Quran's Al-Fil the Elephant Surah. Scribbling at a frantic pace, Babel's scribes dutifully embarrassed themselves and their religion, not to mention their wannabe god. Quran 105.001 Have you not seen how your Lord dealt with the owners of the elephant? Quran 105.002 Did he not make their treacherous plan go wrong, astray, for naught, confused? Quran 105.003 And he sent against them hordes of flying creatures, birds in flocks. Quran 105.004 Which pelted them with stones of baked clay or porphyritic lava. Quran 105.005 And he turned them into stalks of straw devoured, pastured crops of corn, or empty fields, eaten up. That is the entire surah, from the absurdly impossible introductory question to the tragically confusing conclusion. What happened to the clever snake in the garden with his snappy repartee? Did he suffer heatstroke in the desert? A hadith describes the magic of the baked clay pea, regaling us in a frightful tale of transformative plague. Whoever was struck by a pebble started scratching his body, tearing his flesh. 102 inches Reality, the Abyssinian brigade was infected by smallpox. Even Islam agrees, in effect calling their god a braggadocio's liar. Ishaq 27 Utbah told me that he was informed that this year was the first time that measles and smallpox had been seen in Arabia. So much for the baked clay peas, hordes of birds, and resulting straw. And while truth undermines Allah's feat of daring do, the Islamic tradition affirms a shocking reality. 60 years before the first Muslim tread the planet, Allah was a pagan god, and the Qusayy, the center of Islamic worship, was a pagan shrine, giving Allah in his house a history that isn't the least bit flattering. Desperate to prove Allah was real, Muslims attributed this bizarre tale to their anemic deity. Good thing they did. As it turned out, this peculiar story became Allah's only miracle. But it also means Muhammad's arrival was heralded by a horrible plague. At least that was prophetic. When Abdul Muttalib, Muhammad's grandfather, Meccan king and Qusayy custodian, heard of the approaching men, he told Allah and his pantheon that they were on their own. Ishaq 24 Allah, you know that we do not wish to fight, for we do not have the ability. A man protects his house, so you protect your house. Don't let their craft overcome your craft tomorrow. Deliver up the black barbarians. Tabari adds the following insight in his Tariq. Tabari 6:32 But if you want to leave and change our Qibla, the direction the idolaters faced in prayer 150 years before it was mandated in the Quran as a result of the Second Islamic Civil War, you may do as you please. On his exodus, Muttalib may have said something like, as for me, I'm out of here. I know that the family business is a scam. It's been nice, but we can always stack a new pile of rocks when the invaders are gone. 103 These hadith are also contrary to the Muslim revisionists who claim that pre-Islamic Arabs were prone to fight at the drop of a turban. However, Muttalib is alleged to have told the Quraysh, if we offer no resistance, there will be no cause for bloodshed. Supposedly seeing that they were outmuscled, and being merchants, not militants, the pseudo-Meccans, at Muttalib's suggestion, scampered out of town and headed for the hills. They let their rock gods fend for themselves, stoning the intruders, or dropping pebbles as the case may be. This should give us pause because it means that it must have been Islam that turned these pacifists into warriors. Muslims, in an effort to commemorate Allah's magnificent achievement, tell us that Muhammad was born in the year of the elephant. They say it is proof he was a prophet. But that's a problem. If Muhammad was born in 552 CE, the year history says Abraham moved north astride his lumbering pachyderm, he would have been almost 70 years old when he became a pedophile with the 6-year-old Aisha. That's really creepy. And if Allah and Muslims need to falsify an event to make Muhammad appear prophetic, what does it say about the veracity of their religion? Further, if baby Mo entered the world of make-believe in 552, then Muhammad would spend the first 70 years of his life, rather than 52 years producing the Quranic repetitions of the obnoxious never-ending argument, its deplorable satanic verses, the subsequently embarrassing Knight's Journey, a litany of 96 other plagiarized and mean-spirited rhythmic rants that became surahs, and then be discarded as a pathetic fraud along with a score of malcontent Muslims from Petra before the Hijrah to Yathrib in shame. However, the scribbling scribes would have us know that there was a ray of hope. For Arabs had come to recognize that it was high time to stop worshipping stones. 104 The rest of the world had long since gone monotheistic, thanks to the Jews and Christians. These religious leaders, called Hanifs, were monotheists by way of Judaism's influence in Yemen. Ishaq 99 Waraka Nawfal, Ubaidullah Yash, Uthman Huwarith, and Zayd Amr were of the opinion that their people had corrupted the religion of Abraham, and that the stone they went around was of no account. It could not hear, nor see, nor hurt, nor help. They told their people, find yourselves a religion, for by God, you have none. These Hanifs not only inspired the first score of Quranic surahs, but they also served as Muhammad's link to the notion that Islam was the religion of Abraham. And yet these men said, the stone they went around was of no account. It could not hear, see, hurt, or help. That stone was Allah's. A generation before Allah's messenger stole Islam from Qusayy's heirs, Arabs in his hometown had figured it out. Their moon rock was no better than moonshine, a source of money and false hope, nothing more. According to Ibn Ishaq's collection of hadith, Waraka became a Christian. His credibility will soon be usurped to advance Muhammad's agenda. Ubaidullah became a Muslim, rejected Islam the following year, and also became a Christian. Uthman became a Christian as well, holding a high office in the Byzantine Empire. But Zayd stayed where he was, he accepted neither Judaism nor Christianity. He abandoned the religion of his people. As we shall learn, Zayd recited poems that formed the basis of the early Quranic surahs. And yet on this day, the dutiful father of Muhammad's 6-year-old sex toy became the center of attention. Ishaq, 99, Abu Bakr said that he saw Zayd as a very old man leaning his back on the Kaaba saying, O Quraysh, by him in whose hand is the soul of Zayd, not one of you follows the religion of Abraham, but I, O God, if I only knew how you wish to be 105 worshipped I would so worship you, but I do not know. Then he prostrated himself on the palms of his hands. The implications of this hadith are devastating to Islam, especially when we witness the similarity and superiority of Zayd's poetry to that contained in the Quran. Although Hanif's poems predate the Quran, you'll appreciate them more when they are set in the context of Muhammad's initial revelations. Some say that material stolen from several sources ceases to be plagiarism and becomes research. If that is true, Islam was Muhammad's research project as he stole it from Qusayy and Zayd, Jews and Christians. Continue reading.